Call the Wednesday, October 9th, 2013 meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission to order. And will Secretary Elner please call the roll?
Commissioner Alchek. Vice Chair Keller.
Present.
Commissioner King.
Present.
Commissioner Martinez.
Present.
Chair Michael.
Present.
Commissioner Pinelli.
Present.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Present.
6 present.
And do you have any announcements for us this evening?
The only announcements for this evening is the next meeting will be Wednesday, October 30th. The tentative agenda items for that evening will be the California Avenue concept plan and the traffic model. And that will be it.
So thank you very much. So we'll begin the meeting with oral communications. This is when members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda. And Secretary Elner has speaker cards if anyone here tonight would like to address the meeting. So seeing none, we can move right into the public hearing. And the first item is the transportation element. And we will review the draft element, the vision statement, goals, policies, and programs of the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. And you can open it up for a staff report from Stephen Turner.
Great. Thank you, Chair Michael, and good evening, Commissioners. Stephen Turner, Advanced Planning Manager. We're here tonight building upon our previous meeting with the Commission to review the transportation element as part of the comprehensive plan amendment process. Our last meeting was on August 28th, and I think for everybody involved, both staff and I think the Planning Commission felt that that was a very good meeting for the review of this element. Certainly staff received a lot of very good comments and suggestions from the PTC members themselves, but I think the one of the highlights of that meeting was the participation by the public. We had a number of public speakers attend and speak about the item. We received quite a bit of email that was forwarded to the commissioners for your review. And I believe that staff and the commission really appreciated the work by the public to really try to understand the transportation element and the amendments that were being proposed. The commission felt, I think, so strongly about that they directed staff to do a couple of things. Number one, the commission felt that it was important to extend the opportunity for public comment by 1 week after the meeting, just to give other people some opportunity to review the element and provide questions and comments to staff. And so we did allow that, and all of the comments that we received, we compiled together and included into 2 documents that we posted on the Comp Plan website. One document was focused specifically on the transportation element. The second document were more general comments about city policy and the Comp Plan amendment itself. But the comments were compiled and posted up onto the website. The Commission also directed the Transportation Element Subcommittee to reconvene and discuss and review the comments that had been received both from the Commission and from the public, and to provide responses to those comments. And we were also to post those comments up on the website. So the Transportation Element Subcommittee met a couple of weeks ago to review those comments and provide responses. Those are contained within your staff report. And the transportation element has been revised to reflect those comments. The Commission also felt it was important, in order to give the public some kind of baseline understanding about the transportation element and the Comp Plan amendment process itself, was to prepare 2 frequently asked questions documents. One was focused on the transportation element itself and the comprehensive plan amendment process in general. The second FAQ document was focused on the model. There were a number of comments that we received about the model, questioning the intent and purpose and development of the model. And so the staff and commission felt it was important to provide some background information to the public. So we have prepared those 2 documents, which are also up on the website and contained within your packet. Staff has also updated the disposition table to show the connection between the existing goals, policies, and programs in the transportation element and the new transportation element goals, policies, and programs, and that is contained within your packet as well. There were changes and revisions and edits to a number of goals and policies and programs within the element. Again, those are contained within the body of the staff report and in the element itself. They're relatively self-explanatory. They weren't particularly focused on any one key issue, but really were comments throughout each goal, policy, and program. So certainly we are very enthusiastic to bring this version back to you. Staff is recommending that the board provide the review and comment and support the inclusion of the transportation element into the comprehensive plan amendment process. And that would conclude the work of the PTC on this particular element. What I wanted to do to wrap up the staff presentation was give the Commission a sense of context about the schedule and where we're at with the review of the document. And I believe at places you have just a one-page matrix that was intended to provide a summary and overview of what we've accomplished so far as part of the comprehensive plan amendment process. And over the many years that we've been working on this, we have achieved quite a bit. With the completion of the transportation element review tonight, we will have completed really the review of all of the technical documents of the comprehensive plan amendment. So these are the documents that will receive environmental review through the California Environmental Quality Act process. And the other two elements, the business and economics element and the governance element, will follow the review of the transportation element. The Business and Economics Element Subcommittee has been meeting for a number of weeks and have been providing suggestions, revisions, and comments for the amended Business and Economics Element, and we look forward to bringing that to the full Commission within a few months. That will be followed up by the Governance Element, which started a number of months ago, but I think due to staff resources, we decided to focus on the Business and Economics Element. But after the completion of the transportation element, we feel that we can get started on the governance element as well. Moving forward from here, it's very important for staff and the Commission to really show the City Council the work that we have been doing. And as you recall, the Commission held a study session with the City Council a number of months ago to give a general overview about the work process and products that the Commission has been working on for these past few years. We are working on a strategy to bring each of the elements to the City Council for their review. There was discussion with the City Council about the correct process to present these elements to the Council. What has been decided, at least for the first element, which will be the transportation element, is that we will bring the goals, policies, and programs document that is contained within your packet to the full City Council for their review and comment. We will be able to get a sense of their comments and their sense about how we've done in preparing the transportation element. If they feel comfortable with the process of reviewing each element in front of the full council, we can certainly do that. There was a recommendation that perhaps we could have a subcommittee of the council and a subcommittee of the Planning Commission perhaps review each element in a perhaps more informal manner. That could happen perhaps a little bit more quickly than individual council meetings. We're looking at that as an option, and that will be certainly up to the City Council if they want to move in that direction. But we would like to get the transportation element in front of the council this year, to be followed by the review of the remaining elements in Q1 of 2014. Once we get a sense of council's acceptance of the elements, staff will feel very good about moving on really to the next phase of the process, which is the environmental review. It's the environmental impact report that would be prepared to take a look at each of these elements in addition to the CalAV concept plan and the East Meadow area concept plan. We will prepare a draft EIR. We will have that publicly reviewed and bring the results of the EIR back to the Planning Commission and to the City Council for ultimate adoption by the Council sometime hopefully late next year. And so that's just a very high-level overview for this meeting. I think what staff would like to do, each time that we present each of these elements and additional information to you about the comp plan amendment, we will provide to you a schedule to show how we're doing and meeting our goals and moving forward. So we'll provide you that context at each meeting going forward. I think that will give the Commission a good sense of how we're doing, and if we run into any roadblocks, what those are, and discuss perhaps how we can get around those roadblocks. But certainly staff, and I know the Commission is very interested in concluding this process and moving on to the next step, and so we're looking forward to working with you to achieve that goal. So that concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Stephen. I just wanted to reflect that Commissioner Alchek is also present. And then before we get to the Commission comments and the public questions, I just want to note that in the past that the PTC has had subcommittees that worked on each of the elements along with staff, and has done quite a bit of work over the past few years. And now that we're in the final stage of our work, it becomes important for us to be supportive and to coordinate with what Council will be doing in terms of its review and approval of the overall comp plan amendment. So what we're going to streamline our comp plan subcommittee structure into one comp plan committee. Chairman Emeritus Martinez is going to head up that committee, and I will volunteer to serve as well, and I'll talk to our colleagues on the Commission and get a third commissioner as a volunteer to round that out. So we'll be available as a resource. What we're going to do now is just very briefly, if any of the commissioners have clarifying questions of Mr. Turner, maybe maximum 3 minutes, and that you may not have any questions, but then we'll go to public speakers. Anybody? So hearing none, Vice Chair Keller, do we have any public speakers?
Yes, we have one public speaker. I expect there to be more cards, though. The first public speaker is from Phyllis Castle, and you'll have 3 minutes.
It needs to be green. Oh, okay. I'm Phyllis Castle.
Would you mind moving the microphone closer to you? So
Closer?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's just a little funny because I have to be able to read, too. Okay, I'm Phyllis Castle. I'm Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto, and I have 4 points that I want to make. I won't take 3 minutes, I hope. The first is that most of the changes, as I read them, are either neutral or improve the transportation element by taking words like consider or study and changing them to the use of action words like implement, and I like that change. On the staff report, page 7, program T7.16.2, funding grade crossings. The second sentence, it needs to be reworded. I just couldn't quite figure it out. Maybe it just needs to be 2 sentences, but I couldn't figure it out. The third point is that an elective neighborhood residential parking program does make sense as one leg of a transportation management program. It was not implemented in the past due to funding limitations. It had been recommended at one point. The League is concerned, this is point 4, about the policies related to fully parking every building. Shared parking is much more efficient use of parking space. One business needs additional space in the morning and another in the evening. The real question is, what is an effective number of spaces that will park those who need it and yet encourage the use of other transportation demand programs? The requirements of a FAR for residential parking and mixed-use projects may discourage mixed use or may push the parking outside, and we should be careful of that. Please be careful that the city is balancing all the legs of a parking and traffic management program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Nielsen Buchanan.
First of all, I really do appreciate the very deliberate process that has unfolded to get the transportation element this far along. I had really hoped that 5 or 6 neighborhood leaders would have been able to really focus at this last juncture of the polishing off this transportation element, but quite frankly, we weren't up to the task. We just simply weren't able to get organized. As you know, there's a little ballot measure that's distracting 3 or 4 of the best leaders. That'll be over soon, and quite frankly, I haven't been able to get myself above counting cars in the parking situation. But I think we're moving along. I am a big advocate of knowing where the facts are before we jump into a lot of assumptions about parking and traffic. And I composed hastily on my iPad and my iPhone up in the mountains with a lot of grammatical errors, but in short, I think there's a gap between where we all are as residents queued up in the traffic, watching intersections, change lights, watching the parking tidal wave come at us, and still feel a void for what are the basic facts. And therefore, I composed, with the help of a few other leaders that were available over the last weekend, to find some way that you can bridge the gap between the lofty goals and actual problems. And I did propose, and I'll repeat it here, is that it really would be helpful to have some simple explanation in an understandable fashion of what's the condition of 5 or 6 or 10 key intersections, that your planning professionals, your traffic engineers, could just flat say this is the conditions at Oregon and El Camino, or Alma and El Camino, but whatever they are, you pick them. The same thing goes with endangered neighborhood streets. I'm acutely aware of 2 streets in my neighborhood, Everett and Hawthorne, that I don't have the facts. I haven't yet bought one of those little traffic counter things like people in Menlo Park have done, but I have a pretty good feeling that there's a mounting problem on at least 10 endangered neighborhood streets, and there ought to be some annual reporting of conditions for that. If the public knew those conditions, better solutions, better planning would unfold. Thank you.
The next speaker is Robert Moss. And that's the last card I have, if anybody else.
Thank you, Chairman Michael and Commissioners. As you know, traffic and parking have been a problem in Palo Alto for many years, and the council finally recognized that they should be a priority issue to talk about and try to address. And looking at this revised programs, you have a lot of things in there that are very nice, but unfortunately the fundamental problem of additional development, both commercial and residential, which is going to create more traffic problems, isn't addressed. And I don't know how you really can with something like this. So one of the things that I'm not sure if it's even something that we should be doing or it's our responsibility to do, but one of the things that could reduce the traffic impacts would be if we had a really good public transit system. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but a little over 40 years ago, Palo Alto had their own bus system. And we had buses all through Palo Alto. A lot of the streets like Greer and Lewis and then Meadow. And it was fairly efficient. And in the early 70s, it was merged with VTA, and VTA promised that they'd maintain the system. And it was almost a year before they started cutting back lines. And after 5 years, there was almost nothing local. So we haven't had anything to replace the car for decades. Now, we tried putting in a shuttle system. You know, we have one that goes up and down Embarcadero and serves the schools, for example, and one that went down Arrestadero and served Gunn. But that's only for a short period of time during the day. So one of the things we ought to be looking at is how can we get a local transit system set up, whether we have to have the city spend $500,000 or $1 million a year for local shuttle buses, or we can get VTA to expand, or we have some third party. maybe get Stanford to expand the bus system they have. But it might be cheaper for the city to spend $500,000 for a shuttle bus than to have to constantly try to change the configuration of the streets and worry about parking lots. So a lot of the policies you have in here are very nice, but we have a fundamental problem, and I don't really see how we can address it just on a local basis unless we provide something local that allows people not to take their cars out and drive. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Moss. And that's all the speaker cards we have for this evening. So we'll bring it back to council. Do we have to close the public hearing? No. And let me, at this round, let's give everybody up to 5 minutes, and maybe start with Commissioner Martinez.
Thank you, Chair Michael. Like other people that live in Palo Alto, there isn't a day that goes by that traffic and driving and getting around Palo Alto don't enter into our decision-making process. I was thinking about it earlier, and if I want to invite a friend to have dinner downtown, I have to worry about whether it's going to take her a half an hour to park. If I want to have a meeting downtown, I strategically pick a time where I know I can get in and out. If I want to go from downtown to 101, I know there are certain times where you just don't want to do that. If I want to go to Cal Avenue for lunch with my family, sometimes I think about other places we might choose. And I live in South Palo Alto, a fairly easy place to live. I can walk to 4 supermarkets, can walk to Caltrain, can bicycle to downtown. I don't have to worry about coming home and not finding a parking place in front of my house. I don't have small kids to take to school and worry about traffic or worry about the impacts of parents taking their kids to school. So I've got it pretty easy, but yet the strategy of how to get around Palo Alto enters my planning every single day, as it does probably for everyone. So the idea of traffic and parking impacts and is really about what exists today. The transportation element addresses a lot of issues going forward. You know, how do we make sure each new development takes care of its own parking? How we address climate change by having more EV charging stations. It looks ahead as if what we have to deal with today isn't the problem that's the most urgent. I think in other cities, the comprehensive plan typically deals with land use as the priority. In our city, the transportation element may be the most critical planning document that we need to make sure we get right. I appreciate all the hard work, all the good ideas, the strategies about how to address things that aren't working right. But, and I'm going to support this going forward to the council because I think we need to do this. But I'm not certain that there's enough in our transportation element that deals with the problems we have today. Thank you.
So thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Who would like to go next? Commissioner Pinelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I see the comprehensive general plan is, I think the nature of the comprehensive general plan, it makes it very difficult for it to be a solution to the city's problems. I see it more as a synthesized summary of our values. I've gone through the document several times, and I have to be reminded of the old adage that the perfect is the enemy of the good. Personally, I'm ready to adopt it and move on, because I think it does a very good job of what it's intended to do, which is to be a synthesized summary of our values. However, it doesn't advance a solution to the parking problem or any of our parking and traffic problems. I don't think it was intended to. I just don't think that's what its nature is. But we do have a number of different problems, projects, and initiatives, and especially in downtown and in Cal Ave, the Cal Ave neighborhoods. In downtown, for example, we've got the office cap study. We've got the numerous parking problems that have been well documented. Things like associated with traffic, for example, the proposal to turn High Street into a two-way road. We've got HSR, the high-speed rail. We've got 27 University. We have a number of really big problems and projects. And I don't think the right way for us is to be reactive and have piecemeal, project-by-project approaches, our solutions. If any of you are familiar with Stephen Covey, the author, who wrote a phenomenal book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I like to always refer back to my favorite of the 7, which is begin with the end in mind. Meaning you got to know where you're going before you leave the station. Otherwise, you're probably not going to make it to your destination if you don't know what your destination is. To this point, I'm calling on the city to develop a downtown specific plan, not a concept plan, a specific plan that brings together, that's consistent with the policies outlined in the comprehensive general plan, but brings together residents, businesses, and developers to create a specific vision for what downtown's going to look like in 2030, and to create a step-by-step plan for how we get from where we are today to that final vision. And this is going to be something that's concrete, specific to downtown, and if it makes sense, that template can be used to address the specific issues in the Cal Avenue area. But I think the point is that rather than trying to solve these things bit by bit, let's decide where we want to be and figure out how we get to that final goal, solve all the problems that are on the plate, and have, I think, a better end product. Thank you.
Commissioner Alchek?
I think the transportation element is ready for approval. I think it's been well prepared. I appreciate the effort of the commissioners who worked specifically on it. I don't share Commissioner Martinez's perspective that I think about parking for my lunch dates and dinner dates. I don't. I've never had a hard time finding parking in downtown during lunch. I don't know if it's because I go to the garage behind Joya every time, but I've never had a hard time finding parking downtown for lunch. Mostly probably because there's a 2-hour turnover. I think that there are people that would like to see something in the transportation element that says until we have a reduction in the parking crisis, the transportation element should prohibit approvals of future developments. I don't share that view. I think that our issue here with parking and transportation demand management can be addressed through residential permit parking programs that can be implemented rather easily. I think if those programs were implemented overnight, you would see your business assessment district, or however it's referred to, volunteer to come together to find another parking solution like a parking garage that they could support financially. So what I'm trying to say is that I think the transportation element actually provides us with a really great vision of the sort of qualities that we wish to have be a part of all projects that we pursue, and paint a picture of a Palo Alto that is exactly the one that well, at least from my perspective, that we would want. The notion of holding up developments that enhance density downtown simply because our city's government isn't effectively dealing with the parking problem doesn't sit well with me. And I don't think that our transportation element is the problem here. So we don't need more goals that state what we should be doing about parking, or the goals and the programs and the policies that are there are effective. We just need to actually act on them. And if we make some effort here to address these concerns, I think a lot of the heat that's on this commission would dissipate, because the concern isn't the redevelopment of our buildings that enhance density, that increase traffic, that cause these problems. The problem is that we're doing it at the expense of some of our downtown neighborhoods. Those issues are addressed in this transportation element. The element lays out policies and programs that should protect those residential neighborhoods. It has goals that address those problems, those concerns. So we're there. Now we need to actually act on these policies and goals and programs. And so I don't actually think it's a bad idea to have a downtown specific plan. I think that's a great idea. Maybe by 2020 we'll have something like that. No, I mean, we shouldn't have to wait any longer for the implementation of some of these parking solutions that we've been talking about for 2 years. We get those done, I think we can see some results, and we can motivate the downtown businesses to be a part of the solution that they need, which is parking for their employees, and the Caltran community to develop a solution for them, which is parking for their riders. Those riders and those employees shouldn't be parking in front of homes in Professorville. We solve that problem, that community will come to us and ask us where we can put a garage, and they will help pay for it, because it will affect their businesses dearly. I think just the other day someone was mentioning that the price of commercial office space in downtown Palo Alto is nearing midtown Manhattan prices, $8 a square foot, $7 a square foot. The people who are managing those properties will do everything possible to make sure that they can be parked. So again, let's put them in a position to do something about it.
Thank you. And Commissioner King?
Thank you. So I have a question, if I may, and I apologize, I missed the last meeting and have not been involved in the creation of this plan. So this is regarding a new policy, T 2.9, on page 18 of your handout. And so, if possible, could you, one, let me know when you're there, and two, I'll ask a couple of questions, and then if you could maybe walk me through this. Because this seems like a significant statement. Prohibit development that causes level of service E for a particular intersection unless the council or director of public works finds that. And so I guess the one about which I am least certain is the first one. There are no feasible improvements to improve level of service to a level of service D or above. So my questions are, one, are we saying prohibit development? Does that mean we are not going to enable any increased entitlements, or that that would preclude development of an existing entitlement because its impact would cause degradation of the level of service? And then secondly, if, let's say the level of service was, let's say it's F now, and then the development is determined that it would cause a level of service E, then are we saying that it has to get improved from where it sits now to level of service D for the development to go forward?
Thank you very much, Commissioner King. My name is Jaime Rodriguez. I'm the Chief Transportation Official for the City of Palo Alto. Just to provide you a little bit of context regarding this proposed policy, the City of Palo Alto already operates its level of service intersection concept under this policy here, at least the first introduction, that prohibit development that causes level of service E for a particular intersection unless the city or public works director find that for these various reasons. When a project today has a level of service E, it's required to mitigate it somehow. And so this actually makes sure that there's a requirement to continue to mitigate those impacts as part of a project coming in, and there's various ways to mitigate that. The intent of this specific policy tried to recognize that there may be intersections that we do not want mitigated, somehow that they improve capacity. So as an example, I'll use the very specific intersection of University Avenue and Middlefield Road. There could definitely be capacity added to that intersection if a project were to impact it, but we may not want it to be improved such that you add left turn pockets on every street, you add left turn arrows, you lengthen the pockets, because that begins to change the character of that intersection, the character of that surrounding community. So what we tried to do here was set up a method for us to develop what we were calling in concept and theory a protected intersection list, meaning that we recognize that there are some intersections that we do not want improved, and that we try to set up alternative programs. And what those programs are, we have to go through the process of creating them, so that when a project would impact an intersection, but we don't want it mitigated to a solution that would result in a significant change of the intersection or widening of the intersection, that although may be good for a vehicle, are not good for a bicyclist or not good for a pedestrian, we can set up a program to allow that project to do something else instead. That was kind of the intention of the policy.
Okay, and then, so then are we saying that if an existing entitlement, somebody wanted to build out their project, that they would not be allowed, that if it degraded the service to level E, or even if it currently exists as level E and it stays level E, they would not be allowed to develop that project?
I think the intention would be that we would work with that developer to instead somehow fund alternative improvements to mitigate that instead. A lot of other communities do have these protected intersection lists. A good example, San Jose has them, Sunnyvale has them, Santa Clara has them. We just don't have one. So the intention of this policy is to kind of allow us to develop a framework to develop that list, and those alternative mitigations the developer could then do, so that a developer could say, hey, if you don't want me to improve this intersection, then I don't have to do it. Well, the intention is, well, no, we just don't want you to do that improvement at that intersection. We want you to improve something else instead.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that the general intent, I think, is great. I'm just a little confused on the implementation. But of course, I realize this is not an ordinance. This is a plan. And so thank you for your answer.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Thank you. So first, I think this is probably one of the most important elements, and so I appreciate the subcommittees work on it. And of course, the staff works as well, and the public's input. I largely agree with my fellow commissioners on the comments so far, especially Commissioner Alczek's. I think this is just about ready for approval in my mind. It's not already perfect for approval. I think there's probably always small updates we can make here and there, but it's I think it's well said in terms of don't let perfect get in the way of good enough. So I would support the approval of this. I had a few small things I thought about, but they're not super critical. One of which was the automobile cap, the 1.2.4, an automobile cap as a tool to regulate downtown development. It just seems to be in the wrong places about greenhouse gas, and yet this thing's talking about regulating downtown development. So it didn't seem quite the right place, or even I don't know if it even makes sense given we are in Palo Alto. But and then I think 1.17, which is encourage private sector fuel efficient taxi service, which is great. But I think there's also car sharing. There's a lot of other things coming online. So I'm not sure it has to be a taxi service per se. But these are really small nits, and overall, I think this is a really good piece of work, and I support it. Thank you.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So first I'd like to thank the staff. I enjoyed working with all of the staff members that worked on this element. There are a number of them. And I appreciate, and I think that all of it working together made this a much better element than it would have been. I also appreciate especially the comments from members of the public in the last few weeks. As you can see, we looked at them very carefully and incorporated them and addressed your comments there appropriately, I think. I appreciate all the comments and the hard work of the members of the Planning and Transportation Commission and their previous comments and review, and I think that this is a excellent result of hard work on a number of people coming together. I agree that the best is the enemy of the good. In terms of some comments that I'm not, and we can continue iterating on this, but I don't think we should keep on going. There are 3 things that I've identified based on comments at previous commission meeting that didn't cover this topic, as well as in response to Mr. Buchanan's comments that I want us to consider. And whether there's a desire to incorporate this or not. And if there's not a desire to incorporate this, we can just pass it as is. And if there's a desire to incorporate this, then we can approve it in principle and have the subcommittee work with staff on the proper wording of this. So the first thing is with respect to item number 1, mentioned by Mr. Buchanan, is there's program T.2.10.2, which says monitor on the previously identified 20 critical intersections annually as an indicator of the effectiveness of the city's growth management policies. And I'm just suggesting that we add monitor and public report on the previously identified 20 critical intersections. And I think that I think that if we're going to be monitoring and reporting on that makes sense, and I think that satisfies his comment number 1. In terms of his comment number 2, this is something that in particular, first of all, comment number 1, I'm pretty clear that's a pretty easy thing to do, and I don't see any controversy about it. In terms of problem number 2, it's a little harder to address, but if you do it in parallel, we could have new program 2.10.7, which is monitor and public report on and I'm not sure if the number is 10 is the right number, but whatever the appropriate number is, critical residential collector or local streets annually for traffic incursion and safety. And I don't know if that's something we want to do or how that works, but that's something that you want to respond to. Jaime?
Thank you, Commissioner Keller, I just wanted to respond that, yeah, both of those things are things that we can easily do. And if it would be useful to the commission, we already monitor and annually report on several intersections within the city, but it's done in conjunction with the Valley Transportation as part of their congestion management program. We're happy to provide that link in the minutes to this meeting so that people can get that link and see what intersections we already report on. And then both of the suggestions that you just mentioned are very easy for us to do because we'll already be doing it anyway.
And is 10 the right number, or is there a better number? It's not in there now. 10 is fine, great. The next thing is, there was an issue that we had in terms of mixed use and parking reductions in mixed use. And that came up when we were looking at one of the projects that I'm not going to mention, but it was an issue that we talked about last time. And so I drafted a program based on that, which we can consider and whether we want to add it. And that is allow parking reductions for mixed use only when, one, city residential parking standards apply rather than the state housing density bonus law. So the issue is you can't double dip. If you're using the state rules rather than the city rules, then you're already getting a reduction from that, so you don't get to reduce further. Two, at least the number of required non-residential parking spaces provided on site. So you can't reduce below the number of non-residential parking spaces required simply by adding housing. That doesn't make sense. Three, no parking spaces are reserved or somehow limited for any specific use or occupant other than handicap parking spaces, loading zone, or parking spaces equipped with electric vehicle service equipment, and then limited only to those satisfying California Vehicle Code 22511. That's the vehicle code. It mentions this. So the issue is if you have restricted parking there, then the shared parking doesn't apply. And so you really can't get the benefits of shared parking if you restrict spaces in ways that aren't otherwise. May I continue? 2 minutes. Okay. So the thing there is that the fourth thing, which is a little more in a question of how to do this, is that the amount of parking reduction for mixed use is no more than half the number of spaces required for the residential housing, including guest spaces. Now that might be not necessary based on one, but that's something that we might want to consider. And if there's support for that, then I would want to. Maybe we could refer that to the committee to draft a message and then send it on to the city council. I don't think we need another review for that.
Just to the staff.
What?
Just refer to the staff.
Refer to staff, sure. We can refer it to staff. And is there, I don't know if people want to support this or how we want to.
We'll wait till there's a motion.
Okay. Okay, well, I will, I'll make a motion then. So the motion I'll make is to recommend, I guess, that the Planning Transportation Commission supports the inclusion in the comprehensive plan update, and that we direct staff to add or modify based on to the transportation element before going to the city council the 3 items that I've identified.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner.
I second.
Motion by Vice Chair Keller, seconded by Commissioner Pinelli. Commissioner Alchek has a question for staff.
Is there anything we should be considering about this restriction, in particular about the state and the local double dipping question?
Yes. Cara Silver, Senior Assistant City Attorney. I think that first point is appropriate. I'm not sure that it necessarily belongs in a in the comprehensive plan. It strikes me more of as an ordinance. You might want to draft something a little broader in terms of adopting a program that will reduce the use of parking reductions in mixed use. That's sort of the appropriate type of language that you find in transportation elements as opposed to ordinances. But it's a policy call for the commission.
Would it be possible to sort of support this motion and have staff sort of put it into the terminology that they sort of see as fitting for the comp plan and not have to review it again?
So what I'm hearing is a request for a friendly amendment of Vice Chair Keller that your proposal be referred to staff for review and appropriate treatment in the comp plan as at their discretion.
I think that that's what my motion said. It's basically we're referring to them to write the appropriate language for these 3 items, and then submit them to the council without having to go back to the commission first. So I don't think an amendment is necessary.
Although just to clarify, the sense I have is that you're expecting that would there be some specific amendments to the draft element, but I'm thinking that if staff reviews this and determines that it's actually more appropriate to put in a different context of an ordinance or not to include it in the comprehensive plan, that they would make that finding and simply pass on the plan without one or more of the items that you've mentioned.
I think it's fine for the staff to have discretion on how to handle these 3 items, but essentially, these are the 3 items that we'd like the staff to look at.
Okay. All right. So I've got just some comments.
I'm sorry. Are we still talking? Are we still talking about the motion, or moving on?
No. We were just completing the first round, and I thought it was my turn.
It is.
So we have a motion. It's been seconded. It's been friendly amended, and I just wanted to add to the appreciation for the public, particularly those who've stuck it out through this lengthy process, who did make comments and spoke this evening and other evenings, and to the staff and to the subcommittee, notably Vice Chair Keller, and their tireless efforts to get this correct. And I also want to thank in advance the council for the hard work that they have. I note that Mayor Scharf, in his recent letter to the city, addressed a lot of the transportation issues, and especially parking, which is front and center in this plan. This also relates, transportation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has an impact on infrastructure for roadways and parking facilities and other things. And this goes to I think a significant aspect of the public understanding the importance of these issues, the complexity of some of the potential solutions, and the political will of the public to fund needed facilities and improvements if those are desired by the community. That's a big issue in our town, so it's not all the fault of the officials, it's the public and the voters have their responsibility as well. And then I note that in a lot of the projects that come before the Commission, inevitably, if we're applying, CEQA and the environmental impact, it's inevitably traffic and parking and transportation issues are impacted by literally everything that comes before our Commission. And finally, that the transportation, transit, parking, congestion situation that we see in 2013 might be sort of a status quo as the existing conditions are cause for great concern. And we're talking about a comprehensive plan amendment that will be intended to be viable through a horizon year of 2025. And I believe that it would be foolish of us not to anticipate a lot of changes in literally every aspect of our lives and our communities and our transportation technologies, and whether there's driverless cars that you don't have to park in a facility, they'll just drop you off and come back later and pick you up when you're done. There may be things that are really quite revolutionary that are right around the corner. But I think that with all the work that's been done on the draft element, it is ready to send it to the council for inclusion as part of the comprehensive plan. I will be supporting the motion, and I will open the comments up to the Commission for any further remarks before we have a vote.
Do you want motion comments by the maker and seconder first?
Would the maker of the motion like to comment on the motion?
Yes, thank you. So firstly, I think that this that the transportation element doesn't solve all the problems, as was mentioned. On the other hand, there's a lot of things in there that give us the tools to solve a lot of the problems that have been identified. it was interesting. There was a comment by Mr. Alsman who basically referred to the idea that there are some things in there already. But interestingly enough, some of the things that are in there already are actually, for example, residential intrusion, parking intrusion into residential neighborhoods, is right now in there in the aggregate. And so what you wind up with is in project parcel by project by project. When you wind up there project by project, what happens is that the effect doesn't have the same effect. In this case, things are more project specific, like TDM measures and things like that, and requiring that projects be self-parked. It doesn't allow shared parking as a possibility, but that's in the context of being completely parked. So I think that there are tools in here, and I think that this will require a lot of work, both in terms of implementing ordinances on the part of the Commission and the Council, and also in terms of enforcement of these measures by staff. So it's in that regard, I think it's very ambitious.
Commissioner Pinelli, you seconded the motion. Would you like to say anything in addition?
Let me ask a clarifying question, Mr. Chair. Are we going to do another round of discussion, or are we going to take the vote after I complete my thoughts?
So we can have another very brief round afterwards.
Okay, well then I'm not going to speak to the motion.
Okay, so before we take a vote on the motion, I want to open it up to any final brief comments that commissioners may have. Commissioner Martinez.
Since everyone else has sort of started with a common quote, I want to try one of my own, paraphrasing Winston Churchill, and I'll use it this way. Palo Altans always do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And the transportation element, to me, embodies a bit of that thought, that there is so much of everything else in there. Even now, as we're moving to vote on the motion, there are more additions to clarify, to make it more inclusive, to address parking. And it's the strategy of the transportation element has been that, to, as if our parking and traffic issues are like a dike, and we have 70 fingers here sticking our fingers in the dike, but the problem of that dike is still there. And so what I find missing, I'm going to support moving it forward, but what I would like the council to consider, and I'm not stating this as a friendly amendment or anything, I just want it in there on the record for the council to consider, is are we doing enough to address the issues we currently have? Secondly, we had a directive when we first started our review of the comprehensive plan, and that's we were limited to proposing policies or programs that incurred costs upon the city to carry forth. And in this element, there are a number of policies and programs that will require staff or consultants to spend time and city's resources in order to complete. So as part of this going forward, I would really like staff to provide to council an analysis, not the dollar amount, but where is the TE update proposing additional costs to the city in order to enact? Because we were specifically directed not to do that. And thirdly, I want to ask of the council when they're considering the transportation element to do something which I really only heard Mr. Moss say today, and that's we need to look for other transportation alternatives. As Vice Chair has said, can I continue? Yes. Thank you. We need a big picture of where are we going to do something other than build more parking structures? Where are we going to do something other than accommodating more cars? Palo Alto needs a vision for this that isn't included in our transportation element. We need to be a bicycle-first city, perhaps. We need to do something along the Caltrain corridor that provides enhanced public transportation. We need a big picture of something other than accommodating more cars. And with that, I will support the motion. Thank you.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Yeah, so one thought I had, it's not a new thought, it's actually something I heard from the chair earlier, which is maybe one way to kind of solve some of these problems is, rather than trying to get it just perfect before you get it approved, is more timely updates. So perhaps if this element was updated more regularly, it wouldn't seem so dated as it does right now. So that's just a thought, and so I thought the chair may want to talk about that more, the idea, not maybe not at this meeting, but at some time later. It's actually a good idea.
So just a few comments. I've been curious to educate myself about planning issues. Oh. Commissioner Pinelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to provide, Commissioner Martinez asked me to provide some clarifying comments because I brought up this idea about a downtown specific plan, and he asked me to connect that directly to the discussion about parking and traffic. We have spent a lot of time talking about the parking and traffic problems that we have around the city. And in fact, some of us have even joked that we're going to rename this commission the Parking and Traffic Commission. But the reality is that insufficient parking and intolerable traffic are not problems in and of themselves, but they are symptoms and consequences of other root causes. This is why I think we need this idea of a specific plan focused around land use, obviously, but addressing these problems and consequences proactively. The idea that I have with a specific plan is that we have a plan to move forward to that lays out a vision for what we want downtown to look like and what kind of expectations we have in terms of parking and traffic levels associated with that vision. And I also want to provide one other clarifying comment. My idea of a downtown specific plan is not a way of me suggesting that we abandon any of the projects that we have underway, or like, for example, the RPP. I'm not suggesting that at all. I think we should continue with those, but I'm going to sound like a broken record over the next several months. And I'm going to keep bringing this issue about a downtown specific plan up over and over, and I hope my fellow commissioners will join me at some point. Thank you.
So before we actually vote, I just want to acknowledge the enthusiasm and the appetite of my colleagues in the Commission to explore this policy in ever greater depth and breadth, even as we pass on this challenge to the Council. I could probably extend those thoughts in even different directions, but I think I'm going to refrain and just call for a vote on the motion. All in favor of the motion to include this in the update of the comprehensive plan amendment? say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And we'll take a 5-minute break and be right back. Well, if everybody can take their seats, we can get back to reconvening the meeting. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have one more item on the agenda, which is the proposed on-street accessible parking space policy. This is a policy proposed to allow residents to apply for on-street accessible parking spaces in front of their homes. Space installation and annual maintenance costs are proposed at $250 a year for qualifying residents, and get a staff report from Chief Traffic Official Jaime Rodriguez, Transportation Official.
Thank you, Chair Michael. Following up on the discussion we just had about the transportation element, about trying different things, I think this is one of those tools we want to introduce into the toolkit to allow the community to try a solution that may be appropriate to, in this case, would be a very small audience of the community. The concept we're bringing forward tonight is the concept of a policy to allow the city to install on-street accessible parking spaces. We are in the process of trying several different parking initiatives, and before I get into the specifics of the proposed policy, I just want to give you a quick update on what some of the things are that we are currently working on or that we have plans to begin shortly. We are tonight here to talk about the on-street disabled or accessible parking space policy, but we've actually started a lot of parking initiatives. We've already started the discussions with the City Council regarding updating our zoning codes as they relate to various exemptions that result in parking exemptions within private development. And so that process has already begun. We also are beginning to explore the discussions of on-street permit parking programs, or residential permit parking programs as they've been traditionally called within the community. We did just recently implement a trial program for no overnight parking with a parking element within the Crescent Park community. That was something that took place over the month of September, after about almost a year-long planning process, by the way. And we are in the process of beginning to have discussions with the City Council for the framework of an RPP policy for the city that would allow neighborhoods to opt into a residential permit parking program. Just as a quick reminder for the Commission, we do have one active residential permit parking program within the community in the College Terrace community, and but we don't have a policy that allows that to be expanded beyond College Terrace. And so the policy for a framework of RPP this council will be discussing in November, actually I take that back, in December, will allow neighborhoods to opt in around the rest of the community. We have been having active discussions within and around the downtown with resident leaders and business leaders of downtown north and downtown south to begin those discussions of what RPP may look like within this community. And all of those discussions and proposed policies are available online at cityofpaloalto.org/downtown parking. When it comes to parking supply, that definitely is, though, one of the major elements of the program that we do need to address. And we did want to just very quickly highlight some of the things that are active. We do have an RFP that will be released, or request for proposals to Attendant Park Lot R, which is the garage that's on High Street between University Avenue and Hamilton. And we are also having discussions with our bond council to reformat the way that we distribute permits and the types of permits that we sell to the community. We are also exploring the concept of trying to develop public-private partnerships with the community to build additional parking structures within the downtown so that the city doesn't have to do them on their own, or so that the business community doesn't have to do them on their own. And that's something that we'll be reporting on over the next couple of months. And lastly, the City Council did direct us just the last couple of weeks to begin discussions and updates to them regarding what it would take to develop transportation demand management strategies, either for districts of the city or as a citywide program that can include things such as a transportation management authority that will touch on a lot of the things that you heard in the previous discussion regarding transit fleets specific to the Palo Alto community. So with that, I'll move on to the proposed policy tonight. Currently, again, Palo Alto does not have a policy that regulates us to install on-street accessible parking spaces. We can actually do it on our own today if people ask. A lot of the times when people ask, we try to discourage putting them in because they do, in essence, begin to privatize portions of the street for a specific need. And so we historically have not supported the installation of accessible parking spaces, but yet there are some marked around the community on streets, such as adjacent to parks. The framework for this, though, would support a very specific audience of the community that does have an accessible need that, for whatever reason, may not be able to support on-site parking within their own home. And a good example of that is just in the downtown historic homes that don't have driveways. These are homes that don't have any on-site parking at all. And as you'll see later on tonight, this is a very specific type of policy that would benefit that very small target audience. So the policy, as it's outlined within the staff report, tries to regulate the type of people that can apply. First of all, you have to show that you have proof of an accessible need if you want to apply for an on-street parking space within your in front of your home. Proof of accessibility need is regulated by the Department of Motor Vehicles. So Palo Alto does not issue accessible placards to people. People have to apply and demonstrate that disability through the DMV process or receive some type of a permit through the armed forces as a disabled veteran. Doctors can issue temporary placards. We would not accept a temporary placard as a mechanism to, mark a space in front of someone's home. It needs to be a permanent disability, not a temporary, meaning that you're in crutches for a month because you had a skiing accident, as an example. We also would want to make sure that the person that is asking for the space actually is asking for a space that is actually in front of their home, because that can cause certain conflicts with wanting a space in front of a neighbor's home, as an example. There are times when we want to make sure that if someone requests an on-street parking space for accessible needs, that it actually can be installed. Part of that requires looking at the home itself. If accessible parking can be accommodated on site, that is always our preference. But there are times when it cannot be accommodated. Again, the example that we just talked about earlier was being in the downtown in a historic home without a driveway, or you live on a home that has a steeper grade of a driveway where if you stop your car and you get out in a wheelchair, it isn't a comfortable location for you to get off your street before you get to your home. But at the same time, just because you have a garage that's full of boxes and that is a great location for you to, say, dismount out of an accessible vehicle, that isn't something that we would consider a demonstrated impact of why you can't park on site. We also would want to make sure that if someone asks for an accessible parking space in front of the home, that the space can dismount back onto the sidewalk. So if a home, for example, has a park strip, we would potentially look for the homeowner to pave that park strip so that it can be walkable if they dismount from a car onto the sidewalk. We also would want to make sure that applicants understand that if you apply for an accessible parking space and it is granted, it doesn't actually privatize that space for you. If another neighbor has a demonstrated need or a visitor comes to that area and that space is open, anyone can park in an accessible parking space if they have a placard. So in that case, they are first come, first serve, and other vehicle code restrictions such as parking in a space for no more than 72 hours to prohibit vehicle storage will still apply. We also wanted to make sure that we could remove the spaces if needed, if people were abusing them, meaning they were for parking for too long, or if the property sold and that space didn't need to be accessible anymore, a new homeowner could ask us to remove it for them. We are proposing an installation cost of $250 along with an annual maintenance cost of $250. A sign alone costs about $250 to install. So when we talk about striping a blue curb as well as striping a stencil, the actual cost of the installation is closer to about $750 to $1,000. We came up with the annual cost of $250 per year thereafter because by the time we go around to having to maintain it again after about 3 or 4 years, that cost gets fully recovered by the city. We have received several requests for such of these facilities around the community, and we actually accepted an application to give you a demonstration project of what a facility could look like. And one of the residents that lives in downtown South at 319 Addison met all the criteria that we outlined here today. They are in front of a historic home without a driveway or a apron within their home, and so the resident had a permanent disability and actually was not able to park in front of their home and had difficulty in trying to go to the market or day or night and find a space that was comfortable and accessible to their home. And so we accepted their application and we reviewed it, met with the applicant. The applicant in this case did install the pavers that are shown in the park strip so that if when they got out of the car, they could easily get onto the sidewalk. And that was an additional cost that was burdened by the homeowner. And so again, we thought it was a great success process for us here with this specific example. And so with that, we'd ask you to review and comment on the proposed policy. And if you so like it, forward a recommendation to the City Council to consider adoption and development of an ordinance. Thank you.
So once again, we'll, if there's any clarifying questions from the Commission, we can address those very briefly. Otherwise, then we have one speaker card from the public, which would be the next. So Commissioner Pinelli.
Can you talk a little bit about, or let me rephrase this. Is this proposed policy consistent with all elements of ADA? I don't know. I'm not. This is not a leading question. I just want to make sure that that we're consistent. And has that been considered or looked at?
I'll try to start the answer to the question. We have, when we talk about on-street spaces, there can be more significant costly civil improvements that require someone that when they dismount, if they don't dismount, say, from the passenger side onto that walkable surface, if they dismount into the street, if there isn't a driveway nearby and there needs to be some sort of a ramp to get onto, that can be part of the civil improvements that would be required to provide access to a site. In the example that we showed in the demonstration project, there just happened to be a driveway immediately next to where the improvement was being proposed that provided that access from the street onto the sidewalk. That would be part of the site assessment that we would need to do and cost that would be burdened by the homeowner.
Okay, and then just a quick other question. How does this compare to what other cities do? Did you have a template for this? I mean, I'm trying to just really understand how novel this is. And I don't mean just the program, I mean the fee also.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinelli. There are a couple other communities within the Bay Area that have this. Milpitas has this policy. I actually wrote this exact same policy in that community when I worked there. It's since that Milpitas been adopted in Portland and several other communities around the country, modeled after the policy that you're exactly seeing here today, which is modeled after the Milpitas policy. The program costs in that community are about just $100. We tried to propose a more expensive fee just because it does cost more to install these facilities and maintain them. But if there is concern that the fee may be too high, that's why we're bringing it forward here today. And that would be something that definitely we could discuss.
It was just curiosity. I wanted to understand what the benchmarks were. Thanks.
Commissioner Martinez.
Okay, I have several questions. How big of a problem is this? You gave us no data on how many exist in the city now that you're trying to correct, or how many do you expect people to apply for this in their community? Can you tell us that?
Thank you, Commissioner. We've received several requests in the community. If I had to put a number to it, I'd probably say about 4 or 5. So again, this isn't a very big problem, but at the same time, we don't have a policy that regulates the installation of these devices. And so we want to close that loophole so that if people do ask and have a demonstrated need, we actually can respond. The demonstration project we provided was probably one of the louder community neighbors that we had heard expressing a need for something. We heard a lot of concerns about a need for this when the Crescent Park and overnight parking program was being developed as well, and people expressing concerns of restrictions coming in and then that impacting their ability to park. So there's definitely been expressed interest, but again, a number no more than about 4 or 5 people.
Okay, 4 or 5. And you're also aware that there are a number of disabled people that drive. So the idea of them dismounting from the passenger side and requiring pavers may be sort of overreaching, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Martinez. And that's why I was mentioning earlier that it was part of our site assessment. We need to look at that issue of accessibility. If someone that is accessible, that has an accessible need, can drive, they also need to be able to get from the street back onto the sidewalk. And so there can be a need for additional curb ramp improvement construction on the site. That would be site specific.
But are you limiting this to people that require wheelchairs? Or all disabled people are eligible?
Accessibility need is regulated by in California by the DMV or by the armed forces. So we would only need to know that the applicant actually has an accessible placard that is approved by the state or approved by the armed forces.
And so there are many people that have heart conditions, that have, trouble walking, but walk with a cane, but drive themselves around. There are different kinds of impairments that don't require this accessible ramp. They can go upstairs and such. So are your conditions kind of overextending to people who these conditions really don't apply to?
Thank you, Chair Martinez. Again, for us, sorry, Commissioner Martinez. The type of disability or accessibility in this case, we try not to look at that as part of the policy. That isn't regulated by us. That's regulated by a different body. And so, in this specific case, it isn't about the mobility. It's about providing the parking space need.
But you're making them put in pavers if they don't need them. If they're driving, they're just like any other driver that will find their way to the sidewalk, correct?
And again, Commissioner Martinez, it really depends on...
I'm making you nervous, huh?
I know it does. The thought here is that anyone can park there that has an accessibility need. So if the applicant, can still drive, anyone can park there. Then we have to accommodate all needs. And so making sure that someone can dismount from either the driver's side or the passenger side, or a ramp, or a lift, that needs to be accommodated to that need. So we were trying to cover all of the accessible needs, even those beyond the applicant.
And why do tenants have to get the permission of the homeowner? This is on public land.
That's definitely something that if you don't like it, we could definitely remove it from the proposed policy. The thought there was we wanted to make sure that if the tenant was requesting the applicant, we want to make sure at least that the homeowner does also know. That was the intent.
And finally, last question. When an individual applies through the DMV for one of these disabled placards, there's a form that their doctor signs. If they have an appointment at the DMV, if they don't, God bless them, but if they have an appointment, they hand that to the person behind the counter. The person asks them no questions, types in some stuff, and hands them a placard, and they never have to go back again, and they don't have to pay a dime. Why can't we do something as simple as that?
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. We want to make sure that where these spaces were installed, that they do not cause some type of an impact to a community. In the example of downtown, one can argue that there are significant impacts during the day because of parking availability. We made sure that when we were looking at what occupancy is on the street, to make sure that a space wouldn't result in people shifting off of their street into a different neighborhood to park, we focused really on the nighttime need, the weekend need, to make sure that the people that are already parking at the street at the time that there's impact in the evening was a resident-focused concern. And so we felt it prudent to make sure that there is some form of analysis that's done to make sure that if these were to be installed in the community, that we could respond to someone other than the applicant that expressed a concern that there was methodology behind the analysis for the approval of the space itself.
Any more clarifying questions, Commissioner Tanaka?
Okay, so first of all, yeah, it seems like a very innovative program, so thanks for your work on this and thanks for talking through the pilot. I had a few quick questions. So first one is, has to do with, it's kind of a broader question. So I guess first of all, so this property on 319 Addison, I assume it doesn't have a driveway currently, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I think, okay, one way of fixing this problem is let's make it handicapped so that the person that lives there can be comfortable. But what about the other approach, which is we have a parking shortage. Why not allow people to put driveways in? What is the policy on that? And why don't we allow people to put driveways into their properties?
Thank you, Commissioner Tanaka. We actually did make that option available to the homeowner in this specific example, and that homeowner's preference was to actually build a driveway. That cost was significantly substantial, though, to actually have someone come in and in this case, relocate utilities to where the driveway made sense. It would have cost that homeowner tens of thousands of dollars. And this was definitely a more low-cost solution that preserved, one, that the integrity of that historical look of that home, and in this case also was more cost-effective for the homeowner as well.
Yeah, but I think I guess my concern is just that it seems to cause a more parking scarcity issue in an area that maybe already has parking issues. So, I know these are more questions. I'm not going to dive too much into the issue, but that's something which I kind of wonder about. So, I did offer it. So if people did want to do it, they could do it. Okay, I personally think that's probably a better way of doing it. And then the second thing is, so you talked a little bit about the cost, and I wasn't quite clear on this. So is that $250 per year? Is this cost neutral, including enforcement, including construction, including everything, administration? Is it cost neutral, or is it costing any money?
Initially, it cost us more money to do that analysis and actually put it in. Again, just the cost of construction is closer to about $750 to $1,000. Okay. But we would actually likely have to go out there and repaint it every couple of years, repaint the stencil. And so if you just use $250 after 4 years, we'd actually have to go back out there and do it once again. And so that's how, from a construction standpoint, we remain cost neutral at $250 a year.
Okay. Because what if the issue is someone moves in there, they have this. They're disabled, and then maybe they move later, and so that spot's no longer required, and then you have to get rid of it, right? Someone has to go out there and remove all that stuff. So it sounds like this $250 would not cover it then. We would actually be in a hole.
That's correct.
Okay. So, yeah, so that's the other thing I would be concerned about is just for this to truly be... Okay. For this to be cost neutral. And then, let's see. And then how many spaces are allowed?
We provided parameters for consideration of requests. We wouldn't want to have one more than, say, one per block. And then we also talked about having parameters of about 500-foot radius from one space to another, so that pushed them kind of at least a block to a block and a half apart, depending on the location. And so those are some of the general frameworks that we would look at.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner King, any clarifying issues?
Yes, thanks. So do we have any estimate of the number of placard holders within Palo Alto or the areas that would likely be impacted from DMV or any other data source?
We don't have that data. We could definitely try and outreach to the DMV if you think it would be helpful to add that information to the City Council if they consider it.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, obviously we're talking about basically using part of the commons for a specific use, and as you know, there are potential problems, and there's some, whether it's 1/10 of 1% or 50%, there's some level of abuse in the placard process. Obviously, you're doing some level of investigation, but obviously the potential downstream issues. The other thing, do we have an estimate of the cost of the investigator and staff time associated with the program?
it would be a couple of hours of staff time for someone to head out there at nighttime, meet with a resident, do a quick survey, probably about another $1,000, $1,500 of staff time.
Okay, thanks. And then regarding the how measured, so it looks like you're looking for the sort of the Goldilocks. It has to be congested, but not too congested, or that is the target market. Can you be specific about exactly how that's measured? It says demand should not exceed 70%, but I don't see how, is that 70% curb space, or do we know what that answer is now? How we're going to measure that?
Yes, Commissioner King. It's actually the occupancy of the street. So we would actually have to go out and figure out how many spaces can be parked on the street at any given time, and then compare that against the number of vehicles that are actually parked in the evening and on the weekends.
Okay. I would hope, just to avoid disputes with the applicants, that we, particularly if they're paying a $250 non-refundable, I assume it is non-refundable, the application fee?
No, if we don't install it, we would not take the money.
Okay. So in any event, it's still to avoid disputes that it's a clear metric, like here's how we do it, every time it's the same. And then, so let's say, so you're saying that in the case where if you had, let's say maybe there were even some housing, an ADA housing area where there are multiple units within a 500-foot radius, and so you had potentially 5 people who wanted to apply. We're saying it would be first come, first serve. The first person who requested the space would get that?
Yes, in the case of a regular public street, regular single-family home, that would be the case. In the case where it's, say, a multi-dwelling unit with, say, a private street, we would actually ask the homeowner to work with their HOA to try and find the space first, because that begins to create conflict with that concern we talked about earlier, where someone that requests a space, but it may not be directly in front of the home, it may be in front of a homeowner across the street, and that would be a conflict that we would not want to introduce to the community. And so if it is the case where in a multi-dwelling unit scenario, we would say, we're sorry, we can't help you, you would need to go work with your HOA and try and see if they can move spaces around on site to accommodate your need.
Great, thanks. And may I have just another minute? Sure, thanks. And then, let's see. Well, what about the phenomena? So I know even in Professorville, people have taken to putting cones out in front of their home because that's my spot, and unrelated to ADA. And so obviously that's not legal, but it's an enforcement issue. It seems like there's a potential that people are going to say, hey, I applied for that thing, I paid the $250, and the other person within 500 feet that also has a placard comes over to use it, or the temporary neighbor, and then you get fisticuffs and all, gunplay. Any thoughts ahead on how we're going to handle that?
Thank you, Commissioner King. And just as a quick note, my favorite one of all time was someone put in their Louis Vuitton purse to reserve a parking space instead of a traffic cone. That was the best one I've seen in the community so far. In this specific case,
the mean streets of Palo Alto.
That's right. That's specifically why the application process makes sure that the applicant recognizes that this would become a first come, first served space, that this installation of a space in the home does not reserve that for them, that anyone with an accessible placard would be able to use the space. And that is something that we would just make sure that the applicant acknowledges as part of the application process.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So the first thing is I'm wondering whether, in respect to Commissioner Martinez's comments about the requirements for the space, whether because the ADA space is public for public use, although requested by a applicant, whether there are requirements that might be imposed as a result of that being a general ADA space that has to meet all ADA requirements, that might not be strictly necessary only for the applicant's needs. Is that part of the consideration on the nature of what you put on the parking space?
I'm sorry.
For example, the pavers. There was a question about the pavers. Is the pavers a requirement of it being an ADA space as opposed to a requirement for the applicant? Is that a consideration there, or are the pavers not necessary for an ADA space?
The space needs to be accessible And part of being accessible means that you need to be able to load and unload from the sidewalk level. In this case, most spaces would likely not require any type of that type of an improvement. It just happened to be the case in this specific example that we cited that there just happened to be a park strip. And even though there was a driveway, it's technically not an ADA ramp, that provided and met the need of being able to get back onto the sidewalk. It didn't seem prudent for us to construct or ask the applicant to construct a ramp mid-block in the specific location of this residence. But we wanted to make sure, again, that it was accessible from all sides of the vehicle, and the park strip restricted that use. So it didn't have to be pavers, it could have just been more concrete. In this case, the homeowner wanted to make sure that the look of the pavers matched the additional pavers that were already on the site and wanted to use that treatment.
Thank you. With respect to the prohibition for people who don't have cars, in other words, the idea of using spaces for pickups and drop-offs of disabled people, I'm wondering whether it makes sense to think about allowing that in places where daytime parking is impacted. So if you have a situation where maybe there's enough space at night, but during the daytime there's no real curb space available to pick up or drop off disabled residences, then the discussion about that doesn't really apply. And I'm wondering whether that's consideration that might be allowed.
Thank you, Commissioner Keller. It definitely can be considered. One of the things that we find is just that if you have an accessible placard, you really can't park anywhere regardless of time limits. We felt in this case that if we took a space and just say made it available for other usage in the day and an accessible space only at nighttime, the needs of the individual will vary by time of day, by day of week. And in this case, the one solution was more an accommodation for that specific resident that had a need. And we're just trying to be helpful to the community by being able to have a framework that we have to follow in installing these spaces for them.
Perhaps I'm not being clear. I'm thinking about the idea where a resident who is not capable of driving or doesn't own a car and needs to be picked up or dropped off during the day, we're not accommodating that resident, and there's no parking space, and there's no available curb space nearby to pick up that resident safely. That's the situation I'm talking about, not simply having a time-limited. I'm not talking about having a time-limited parking space there. Thank you.
So at this point, let's open. We've got one speaker from the public who's submitted a card.
Stephanie Munoz, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Well, at first glance, this sounds a whole lot like one of those if it ain't broke situations. But I do think I have a couple of contributions to this. When the downtown, when the uproar came with the residents parking all over, infuriated, and the downtown people said, well, those houses in the residential areas, they don't have garages. They haven't had to put in any parking. And that was really quite irritating. Nevertheless, it was true. It doesn't really seem as if a person should be asking the city of Palo Alto to furnish a parking place because he doesn't have a garage. And in the past, that hasn't been the case. In the past, when people converted their garages, their separate garages, into art studios or in-law cottages, the city made them put in another garage at some point along there. It seems to me that the proper thing to do, that there are two things. You really should expect, if it is at all possible, that the city, that the person should have some on-site on-site parking driveway. I know that the historic house, I mean, I'm thinking of the Lucy Stern complex there, for instance. I know that the houses look much nicer without a garage, but actually that would be true of anybody's house. It would look nicer without a garage. So, I think one could call on the landscape architects of the area, who are very talented, to suggest ways in which a dedicated parking would work that would not be a blight, that would be okay. And it would be used mostly at night, not in the daytime when you'd be seeing it. And you could park there. It could be pretty, I think. And I think that should be investigated before going to this. The other thing is, we sold a house, my sisters and I, a house my mom owned about 8 years ago for $1 million, and a year ago it sold for $2 million. It seems to me that a property owner shouldn't expect to sell a house without a garage for millions of dollars, expecting the city of Palo Alto to provide the parking place. It seems to me that there should be a set aside of the money a set aside for the money, so that they could pay for a parking strip, a parking garage, a parking modification, or a city program or something out of the windfall profit, well, out of the profit, whatever you call it, that the original owner has. That's my thought. I have 2 more short suggestions. Would you like me to continue? They apply. 1 minute. Okay. When I was a child in San Francisco, we had a stable. It was in the Richmond district, but we had a stable, and we had a hitching post outside it. And the hitching post was not much bigger than that bollard. I mean, it was this tall. And it seems to me that you could probably use something like that for the parking indication of the parking, not a big $200 or $100 pole or something. Then it would be attractive and cute and all that. The second thing is, upon this parking that we're so short of, Reverend Baines from East Palo Alto came and commiserated with the Palo Alto City Council about their problems with the showers. And they said, you know, we've put in some showers for the homeless, and you're welcome to use our showers. And I thought, how kind of him. You know, East Palo Alto might also be able to furnish us with some parking. And it would be a big advantage to them. They could make tons of money on it, and they'd have some captive audience for their buyers. It was my other thought. So thank you. Hope you good luck.
And thank you for your comments. I held back on my clarifying questions, and let me just take the sort of preemptive spot. And I had just in the areas of eligibility, cost, and enforcement. On eligibility, there are a number of streets in Palo Alto, certain neighborhoods, where there's an alley behind the house which can be used or should be used or is intended to be used for parking, but may not be used for parking because it's easier just to park in the street than walk in the front door. What's the aspect of your policy if there is an alley access to the house? Would they be eligible to get the on-street accessibility concession?
Thank you, Chair Michael. I think it just depends on the site. I think that's part of why we would need to go out there and try to assess those types of specific conditions. Most of the alleys that I'm familiar with in the community, you know, there typically isn't some type of parking allowed in that alley for various reasons: trash accessibility, emergency vehicle access, whatever the case may be. And so if there is space out there that is eligible for use, I think we would definitely try to understand from the homeowner why they cannot use that space. And if it doesn't provide unobstructed access back into the home, well, that's a very good reason as to why that might not be a functional space, and they may need to be looking at the front of the home for parking.
Okay, and then on the cost recovery issue, I I understand that there's been some effort made to quantify what expense the city would incur in terms of each of these applications, and that if you charged at a fee at a certain level over some number of years, you might get some percentage of cost recovery. Are there other instances, and I'm thinking of maybe electric vehicle charging stations, where we have a policy of promoting the use of electric vehicles and we don't necessarily charge for electric vehicle charging station use, or even, parking downtown, charge for that, although there's a 3-hour limit. But we're talking about cost recovery in this situation and wanting to get some substantial cost recovery. Do we maybe have a policy of supporting our disabled citizens, residents, that would suggest that we should not strive for 100% cost recovery?
Thank you, Chair Michael. I'm not aware of any specific policy that would ask us to not strive for cost recovery. I think in this case, we were not really even concerned about the cost of operations to say do the investigation. As Chair King asked, we do a lot of investigations every day, all year long, for a lot of different types of requests. That's just something that I consider as part of my team's just regular operating responsibility. Operations costs, really weren't coming into play in our mind as this policy was being developed. A lot of it was just trying to provide really what we thought was a valuable service to a very small minority group of the community. And definitely we're not strongly keen on being full cost recovery on the construction either. We understand that people that have accessibility need may have restricted income as well. And so if there's interest in modifying that fee structure, we'd accept that input.
Okay. And then my last question was on enforcement, and that's if there's somebody who parks in the spot that doesn't have the placard, do they get a citation? If the person who has been granted the concession wants to complain, can they get the vehicle towed? What's the enforcement mechanism?
Typically, it would be a call to non-emergency, the police department, and they would receive a citation. They would not have their vehicle towed, but they would receive a citation. I'm going off memory. I think the fine is a minimum of $271. I'm not sure if anyone else on the commission remembers, but that's the number that pops into my head.
Okay. So that's it. And I think I should call on Commissioner Alchek to begin the final round of comments and questions.
In case it's not... in case it's not clear, I want to just ask a few questions to make sure that I understand the rules as they are right now, which is, I'm under the impression that individuals with these placards in the state of California can park on public streets and not be subject to restrictions like parking time limits, metered parking requirements, and even a 72-hour parking restriction. Is that right?
Thank you, Commissioner Alchek. The 72-hour rule for stores, that actually applies to everybody. They would still receive a warning for an abandoned vehicle through court enforcement, and that specific California Vehicle Code restriction applies to everybody. The references for time limit restrictions, those do not apply up to the 72-hour rule.
Okay, so is that statewide then?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's actually federal.
Okay. Is it safe to assume that this problem's epicenter is sort of downtown North in Professorville, from your perspective?
I see interests in the California Avenue business districts. I see interest in, the Southgate neighborhood community and other areas where there may be some type of an outside parking influence within that community.
Okay. I want to sort of try to make this point about this, that the street is sort of quasi-private. So bear with me for a second here. Okay, I'd like you to consider the following. Every residential lot in this city that has a garage or a carport has a driveway, and therefore has a curb cut. Okay, and if you park in a homeowner's curb cut without their permission, I think you risk getting towed. Not a $271 ticket. I think you come home, that car's not there. Which means that there is a space on these public streets that is private. If you don't have a curb cut, if you don't have a driveway and you don't have a garage, you probably are you're most likely to fit in the category of homes that we're trying to preserve and the or the Historical Resources Board is preserving to some extent. I mean, I don't want to say that out loud. It's not across the board, but I imagine that a number of the homes that qualify for that restriction probably don't, or for that preservation, don't have that quality. And I've always thought it was sort of unfair that those homes can't get a curb cut. I would be in favor of a curb cut in front of every home that doesn't have a driveway, so that the homeowner could, in theory, park on a space in front of their home just like every other homeowner that does have a driveway, because that person, there is a right to restrict parking on a public street. It's called a curb cut. Can't park there. That's how I get into my house. You park in my curb cut. If the guy doesn't tow it, I will move it. Right? No one would stand for that. So the notion that there are homes that don't have driveways, don't have garages, screw them, is crazy to me. Give them a curb cut, at least one space, regardless of disability. They deserve it. It's their home. They shouldn't have to pay for it. I mean, I guess we pay for it when we develop our garage, but I don't pay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's a permit fee for that, but I just want to throw that out there, because there's a component of this. Where is it? The demonstrate garage impact, right? Proof of garage impact. If you have a garage that you can't fit your car into because it's a special kind of van, you still have a curb cut. You still have a drive. I'm really unclear why anybody, and there's the one possibility would be you have such a sloped driveway that you couldn't get out of it comfortably. I mean, outside of that scenario, I don't see why anybody who has a driveway could qualify for this and be able to take a space on a street that's not in front of a curb cut or not on there. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it's too much to ask that they go through a process and demonstrate their eligibility for it. I am not going to suggest that there are people abusing this. I'm not going there. But we ought to have a process that's very fair that asks people to demonstrate it. And I think there's a lot of questions here about, well, what if it's someone who had hip surgery in the last year, and it's a cane, and it's not a, if I might have a couple more minutes. I think there's a lot of questions about whether they need a ramp or not, and it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach, which is why I'm sort of opposed to this in general. And I think we would take care of this problem if we allowed people who didn't have driveways or garages to just have curb cut kind of space. I want to suggest one other thing, which is that one space on a street is sort of ridiculous, because if there's two individuals who suffer from this need and they can't find parking in front of their home and they don't have garages and they don't have curb cuts, then you're in essence creating a very competitive moment. Now, I also want to make the point that in the areas that we're talking about, that I know that he mentioned other areas outside of Professorville and downtown North, but if there wasn't such a parking problem remedied by a residential parking permit program, this probably wouldn't be such a big deal, because it wouldn't be so hard to find a space in front of your home. So if anything, if we do suggest this, I would suggest, if this commission does approve this without my support, then I would suggest that it be very temporary until a residential parking permit program was put in place, and this program could be reevaluated to determine if it's even necessary. So again, I think this problem could be solved by curb cuts for homes without garages and driveways. If somebody can demonstrate that their driveway is just so unsuitable for their use, then I think there should be a special process for them to be heard by a panel that can then approve it. It shouldn't just be random. And so again, curb cuts for people that don't have driveway, and temporary if you do approve this, if you do support this, until the residential parking permit program goes in place, and then finally, only in situations of disastrous need. And I just want to make a point that I'm not suggesting it's not a real need. I just think we have to be careful about this. And you can't just put one on, it could be 10 people on a street that need it. I mean, it's just, okay.
Commissioner Tanaka.
So I also support Commissioner Alczyk's position on this. I think there's, in general, I support the spirit of trying to help our disabled residents. I think that's a worthy goal, but I think it's not. I don't know if it's not necessarily the right solution. I think it's more like a partial solution. I think the better solution really is to get the cars off the street, provide off-street parking, provide curb cuts. If the lot, for whatever reason, can't fit the normal driveway conditions, then I think those are where the exception should be. It shouldn't be to have a handicap spot in front of someone's house. Because I think there's a lot of issues with that. First of all, it makes the parking worse in areas where parking is already really difficult. It's not cost neutral, and it, to me, gets very complicated in terms of the staff time, there's enforcement, there's construction, there's the uninstallation. There's a lot of things that aren't being considered, and that money could be used for free curb cuts or something else that would really solve the problem. I think the approval process also strikes me as a little bit arbitrary, right? It's not really clear cut exactly who's qualified, and you have to go see what it looks like, and I think it can make it much more expensive and complicated just for the approval. I also foresee the issue that was mentioned earlier about neighbor conflict, right? I could see this being a really sore issue with a lot of neighborhoods where parking is tight, someone gets a handicap spot, and the neighbors are just pissed, right? I could see that. I've been part of a residential permanent parking program, and I know people get really sensitive to this topic. So I could see battles brewing with this coming online, especially in areas where people really have problems parking. So I think that's another issue. I think there's ADA issues that don't seem to be really kind of worked out. I mean, if the driveway is so steep that someone can't walk up to it, then what's the parking in front of the house going to do? They still have to go up that driveway. I guess I don't quite understand how that necessarily solves the issue. It seems like there's only a handful of requests for this, and if it's such a handful of requests, I agree, maybe you should go in front of the Planning Commission or some other public body to kind of look at this if it's really that small number of people. Because to me, I guess the reason why 319 Addison went through is because the guy didn't have the money to it cost more to put a driveway in than to take a handicap spot in front of his house. And I guess I don't quite understand. He put pavers down. I mean, it costs the city money to put it there. There's enforcement costs. There's a lot of other costs that goes involved. I mean, if you had a curb cut and had a gravel driveway, how much is that really? I mean, I guess I don't quite understand why is there such a big cost difference. And so I think if a lot can't have or it doesn't currently have a curb cut, and there's architectural reasons or whatnot that prevent a normal complying driveway to be in, maybe that's where the exception should happen, not on a public street where you're in neighborhoods where parking's already direly short, and you're making the problem much, much worse. So in general, I just cannot support this. Thank you.
Commissioner King.
Thank you. Let's see. This is one of those things I think where you have, some people who are frustrated, inconvenienced now, and that by providing this solution, we're going to end up with at least an equal number of people who are mad just by the nature of it. And so I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it introduced, my libertarian-leaning ways. This is sort of further away from that part of the spectrum. But I totally feel for people who would be in that situation. Maybe they've lived in the house for many years and now they're disabled and they're having a hard time staying in place. So I would like to serve those people to the extent we can. So I think I would support this. One of the questions is the $250 fee. It's not insignificant. I think that with most programs like this, you want some fee just as a, skin in the game. People really have a need for this. If it's free, then, it lends people to maybe more applications than are necessary. I don't know if $250 is the right amount, because we're clearly not cost recovering, so it's not a strict cost recovery plan. But some personally, I would say somewhere between $100 and $250 is probably a reasonable target. And the other things I would like to see in here would be, if we make a motion, would be that we clarify the measurement of that within the 500-foot area, and that would include the number of times sampled. Are they just going out there one night? Are they going out there 5 nights? So it's very specific, because clearly there's going to be somebody who's going to be mad when they get declined because of that measurement. Secondly, I would ask that if, in fact, people are declined because there is an existing granted space within the 500-foot radius, that staff keep a wait list of those applicants, so that they, when if that space does go away, then we know, well, those people asked, so there's a sense of fairness about that. And we also have a sense, are we serving, what number of people are we not able to serve by that clause in the ordinance? And then lastly, if you would also address that in the event, in my opinion, of an unpermitted garage conversion where they've taken the garage, and I know of houses like this in the impacted areas, and created living area out of that, in my opinion, that would result in a decline. I guess, I don't know if I'll let staff work on that, but in that situation, let's say they had a 2-car garage converted to living space that would have served the need required, and it's not permitted, that they would not receive the benefit. And then lastly, my question is, if in the event where there is no curb cut and a house could accommodate a driveway and or garage, are they allowed to do that, to make a curb cut? Let's say yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner King. Nothing restricts anybody at any home to approach the city and request a building permit to build a curb cut and a pad for parking on the home. Nothing prohibits that. I think that when this specific request came up, we did receive some policy input about, hey, really, are you asking people to convert a historic home to a driveway pad? There was some policy input that didn't seem like the appropriate thing to do for a historic home.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing prohibits it. Nothing prohibits it.
Okay, a single curb cut. You can't have 3 curb cuts. Okay, great. And I'm not, with all respect, I don't quite buy into they should have a curb space because they could have one, so they should be entitled to that space. And in fact, a single car curb cut, I don't believe is an actual parking space, right? How many feet is a single car curb cut, and how many feet is a ADA compliant parking space? Linear feet.
The width of a accessible parking space is about 18 feet. That'd be the minimum that we would go down to.
Uh-huh.
And for a driveway curb cut, it kind of varies by location depending on the lot size. But usually we're looking for somewhere around 12 to 16 feet for the width of a driveway.
Okay, so it's even with a single car driveway. So it is not too far off that, 12 versus 18. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Pinelli.
What do they say? The path to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think this might be a step toward the first level of Hades. I'm concerned that this is going to create a number of issues with enforcement, and it might be moot. It might be moot because the residential parking program, I know there's other areas besides downtown, but I think the RPP, I would rather wait for us to review this policy until after the RPP is in motion, because that might actually make this unnecessary. I don't know that. That's speculation on my part, but I don't like the idea of doing too many things all at once. Let's add them. I have to say, when I was back in engineering school, we learned the KISS principle, keep it simple. And Commissioner Alczyk's point that if any home is entitled to a curb cut, why can't they just have a single parking space there? That seems the simplest to me. If they're entitled to access to a driveway and a garage, I mean, theoretically, they can just park. People could just park in their curb cut and not even park in their driveway, and I don't think we have a problem with that. So, I mean, now obviously there are issues with size and all of those sort of particulars, but I think that's a simpler solution. I'm not saying I endorse it, but I'm not ready to support this proposed policy, although I do believe that its intentions are very, very good. I think that there might be better ways to implement it, or it might be made moot by an RPP. Thank you.
Commissioner Martinez.
So, after reading the staff report before this evening, I was opposed to what was being proposed. After hearing my fellow commissioners tonight, I think I support the staff report. I mean, we're talking about 4 friggin' spaces throughout, how big is the city? 22 square miles, something like that. Come on. You know, I was opposed to it because I think it is too bureaucratic and has some things like the homeowner's acceptance as being unnecessary. I would like to see it an informal, that someone could call and ask if they qualify, and someone would go look at this. As the chief transportation official says, the city does that all the time. They go out and look at squeaky manhole covers and other items on the request of a resident. So the idea of somebody asking if they qualify, would it be permissible, seems like a good idea and a good extension of good customer service between the city and its residents. I've lived in a city that's had these things for years and years. That's Berkeley. They're not a problem. And they're usually in areas where there's a lot of traffic, you know, because there's nearby retail. I think in our city it's going to be slightly different, but it's only 4 spaces. I think we should let this happen. There are not going to be 10 in a block. Neighbors become very accepting towards things like this because they know their neighbor. They know they have a need for accessibility. It's possible that it could be abused like the placard system is. And you see a lot of young people bouncing out of their cars if they're parking in a handicapped spot. But that's, you know, the way it is. We're talking about something that's quite different, I think quite important to the people that are requesting them. There are 4 of these. We should try it. I don't like charging people for this because, first of all, it's not a great expense. You know, it's small in comparison to everything else the city does for our public streets. But if that's what makes it workable, fine, let's do this 250 things. But I think we should recommend to the council that they try this program because I think it has very limited impact. Thank you.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So, firstly, I don't have any particular comment about the amount of the fee, but I do have some comment on other things. First of all, I am sympathetic with the idea of garage conversions. Certainly unpermitted ones should not allow somebody to do it, but on the other hand, Some houses had 2-car garages, and they took away one of the spaces and made it into 1-car garage, and that made the garage small enough that you couldn't do this, and I'm not sure whether that should be allowed either, because you sort of contribute to you contribute to your own problem in that way. But I'm so if there was originally parking spaces there, that's an interesting question. So I'm not sure how you deal with that or know about that, but that does concern me in that regard. With respect to the ability to put in curb cuts, I think that the issue is that to the extent that they have historic homes, and for which it would be a problem in terms of the integrity of that house to put in a driveway and a parking garage, then I'm sympathetic with the idea that you need an alternative there for the disabled. And so I am sympathetic with that idea. I'm also sympathetic with the idea that in the situation where the nighttime parking has a utilization of less than 50%, or weekend parking, that you could put more than one space in. I mean, it seems to me that if it's that low utilization, I'm not sure 50% is the right number, but it makes sense to think about having an extra closer parking spaces in that event than 500 feet. The third thing is that I am sympathetic also with the idea that if you have a resident who is disabled, does not drive or own a car, and needs to be picked up for transport by a something like outreach or whatever, and there is insufficient public parking nearby, on-street parking during the day, that should also be considered justification for putting a parking space so that they can be picked up and taken from point A from their house, from their home to somewhere else and back. So I think that it shouldn't merely be for people who own a car. That's certainly good for nights and weekends. But for people who are picked up by these services during the day and don't own a car, I would certainly think that should be included. And some measure, if the utilization is say greater than 85%, in other words, is fewer than 15% of the parking spaces in that area, then during the daytime, then supporting a residential disabled space, I think would be helpful in that regard. So I'm curious what people want to move forward on this in terms of a motion.
So it's interesting going last on this one. I'm somewhat surprised by the level of energy and vehemence and controversy that this proposal, which is obviously well intended, has provoked. And I think that what you have is a very engaged Planning and Transportation Commission, very action-oriented, and we are itching to solve the city's parking problems. The experience we're having is we're seeing a series of proposals that are in isolation and maybe sort of directed at particular elements or ad hoc versus sort of the whole picture. And the responsibility for the entire parking system is really held at the council level. So we're making comments that kind of go beyond the curb cut, if you will, of this individual, proposal, and trying to solve, trying to boil the whole ocean. But that may not be our job this week, at least. We also have, at least in theory, we have a parking subcommittee, and this is composed of Vice Chair Keller and Commissioner Pinelli. And I've requested a proposed charter for the parking subcommittee, which we will take up at a future meeting when it is presented. But I think this might be something that would be useful to take back to this parking subcommittee and hash out, some of the practical, ideas and the energy that we have to try to improve the idea that's been proposed. I think that with the Newell Bridge, Crescent Park neighborhood, intrusion, there was sort of a notion of a trial period, and I think there's some issues about how the accessibility issue relates to residential permanent parking, that you might want to consider phasing in this for a trial period as part of how you started off. And the fee issue, I think one of the great contributions that Chair Emeritus Martinez makes, is just bringing us back to social justice and issues of good urban planning, and we live in a community and we have to respect the dignity of our fellow residents. And I think that the economics of this are such that you should have an initial fee that could be $250, $200, and then I think on an annual basis there should be a renewal amount which would maybe be less than that, say $100. So that would go away towards preventing any abuse. But I think that the data that you've suggested about the level of need and interest in this is there's sufficiently rare that I don't think this will going to break the bank. But I would be inclined either to support the proposal going forward tonight, or if there really is a sense that the details need to be worked out better, is to refer it to the parking subcommittee and then come back to us when it's ready, maybe in the next month or two. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to a motion. And then any comments that will be in relation to the motion that's on the floor.
What can I start?
Chair Emeritus Martinez.
I like that title. I think we should start with, I'd like to recommend a motion that we recommend to the City Council approval of the proposed staff policy. As simple as that. Okay.
I will second the motion.
Is there space to make a counter motion?
Yeah, let me have the maker of the motion speak to the motion, and then.
And I don't have much more to offer, except that I think what's been offered in terms of waiting for, the downtown study, waiting until we have residential parking permits in place, is a much larger issue than 4 spaces across the city, and I think it's reasonable that we keep it separate.
I was being caught up with logistical issues while you were speaking, but I think that there's it's entirely conceivable that there's a legitimate need for accessibility parking. I think that this is something that Palo Alto in addressing the needs of all of its residents should be prepared to deal with. If in fact, it's been hard to do this in the absence of a policy. I think a policy is necessary, and I think that this is a policy that proposed policy that can go forward and be fine-tuned. Certainly, if there's a trial period, so that it's entirely workable. And I would support the motion. Commissioner Alchek, did you want to?
I'd like to suggest an amendment and a substantive motion as well. I'll start with the amendment, which is just to say that this policy, I would suggest that this policy, if adopted without my support, would not be available for tenants who could be there for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. I don't know if there's a process for someone paying for the removal of those costs, but I would suggest that suggesting that a tenant would pay that. I can just imagine 1,000 scenarios where a tenant is evicted, they've created this mess, now there's no one to clean. I mean, I would suggest that it not be available for tenants who are short-term by definition. And I would like to suggest a counter substantive motion. All right, go ahead. Do you accept that? Or?
No, I don't accept that. I mean, you can envision 1,000 cases like that, but we're talking about 4 actual applications. So, no, not accepted.
Okay, then I'd like to make my counter motion, which is that we recommend that the City Council don't approve this sort of policy. There is so much here that has not been discussed.
You're just voting against the motion.
No, it's not. I am suggesting that we send it to our committee of us and we hash this out instead of outsourcing the thoughtful discussion of this topic, because frankly, we have a maker who's saying there are only 4 people. We have a seconder who's saying there's a legitimate need. If you're hearing passion, it's because we have real problems with parking in this city, and this is not one of them. And I can't imagine that we would spend any more time on this topic and send it to we have not discussed the complexity here. We have nobody here who has this need discussing the topic, and we want to put it in front of the Planning Commission, and we got people who they walk around the streets every night to count the number of cars because of residential parking permit program. I mean, the irony here is offensive. So
I'm
I
hearing
believe the counter motion is to put it to a committee.
I'm hearing a substitute motion.
Substitute motion would be to recommend that we discuss this on a committee level until it is redeemable enough to actually be pushed to the City Council.
So the substitute motion to refer this to the Planning Parking Subcommittee. Is there a second for that? Seconded. Would you have any further comments on your substitute motion?
Look, I don't mean to create controversy here. I'm trying to suggest that we are the Planning and Transportation Commission. Let's not outsource the job of fine-tuning the things that we're recommending. We are already out of the loop on so many different scenarios. We didn't have any involvement in the parking solutions that took place in Crescent Park that are now in full force. We don't even know, we didn't really get a substantive presentation on it.
They're getting off topic.
I'm only suggesting that if we're going to make a recommendation, let's make sure it's bulletproof.
Commissioner Tanaka, do you want to speak to your second?
Sure. So I think while this is very well intended, I think that it's not fully thought out. I think it'd be worthwhile for us to have this go back to the parking subcommittee for further consideration, working out the details. There's a lot of such suggestions I've heard from many different commissioners, and I don't think that's been resolved yet. And so I think for staff to take all this input and try to crystallize into something that's coherent, I think it's going to be very, very, very difficult. I think Commissioner, one of the suggestions I heard was from Commissioner Pinelli was, well, the residential permanent parking program may actually solve a lot of these issues that we're hearing about today. And so it may be worthwhile to actually see, rather than doing a bunch of different parking programs at the same time and trying to work out what's working, what's not working, it may be worthwhile to use the staff time that we might spend on this to really accelerate the residential permanent parking program and help the greater good. So I think, to me, that seems to make much more sense. And it wouldn't be such a piecemeal fashion where we're fixing one little thing here and then fixing one little thing over there. We think a little bit more comprehensively. I don't know if it's only 4. I think that we've heard of 4. I think when the article is written tomorrow or whenever, there may be more people that apply. So I don't know it's only 4. But we do know that there are a lot of residents who are very unhappy about the current state of the parking in several different neighborhoods. And I think staff time would be better spent and staff money would be better spent solving those problems first. It's also about us prioritizing. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems in the world, but we can't tackle all of them. And I think what we want to do is we want to tackle the ones that are most impactful to our residents because we owe it to them. And to spend our time, our residents' time, our commission time on smaller issues, we lose the bigger picture. And I think that's the problem. That's why, I think we've been talking about residential permanent parking program for a long time now, and it hasn't happened because we keep all these little small things keep coming up, and we keep putting the bigger thing, the big problem away. And I think it's not the right, our duty as commissioners to really think about the greater good here and not do these one-offs. So I think yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Chair Martinez, Emeritus Chair Martinez.
Good job. I will not negotiate on Obamacare. Sorry, wrong speech. But I don't understand who we're outsourcing this to. But I do believe that we should pass this on to the council to decide. I understand we have other priorities, but I also understand that this isn't one that we need to get stuck on by creating a subcommittee, by bringing it back to us again. Let the council decide whether this is worthy for us to adopt as a city or whether we should just set it aside. Thank you.
Commissioner Pinelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we're sort of all in vehement agreement that the intentions here are good. So I'm actually glad to know that there is some commonality amongst us here. But I have to echo some of the thoughts we've heard from Commissioner Olczak and Commissioner Tanaka. This piecemeal approach, I don't think is the right answer. We are talking, this is effectively a residential disabled parking program. I think it should be merged into the RPP that we're already discussing, because that RPP is supposed to set out a template for the entire city. Even though we're only talking about it for now, downtown north, downtown south, it's supposed to create the template going forward for other neighborhoods that want it. So I think this should actually be a part of that. So I don't want to confuse things more, but if I were to make a third competing motion, it would be that, but instead I'm throwing my support behind sending it to the subcommittee, and that's it.
Commissioner King.
Could you read the motion, the substitute motion? Does somebody?
The substitute motion would be to refer this to our. The substantive, the other second motion would be to refer this to our distinguished parking committee for further review until such time that they feel it's ready to be presented to this commission, and then we can discuss it again and send it to City Council, depending on how we feel about it.
Perfect, thank you. There had been a little bit of vitriol in the initial, my initial hearing of the motion that has been removed now, so that's great. Yeah, so I think, much as I picture the four people who probably their life is impacted with not having access to parking and them having to wait, on the other hand, I do think it makes more sense to be more comprehensive about this, and it's certainly not a simple plan. So just on the grounds of moving forward with a complex plan that we've just been presented with, I too agree that it would be best to defer to make it part of the comprehensive RPP. Now, that being said, I don't know, the one thing I would like to make sure we're looking at is this is geographically focused. I'm not sure on the RPP how large of an area that would serve. So if we're saying the RPP would solve this problem, I don't believe that's necessarily so. If the RPP says you've got a permit and you've got a 20-block area in which you can park, that doesn't solve this problem. But again, I'll defer that to later discussion. So thanks, and I would be in support of this.
Okay. So as chairman, I have a question of staff and Jaime Cara as the commission's purview, perhaps, because I think what I'm hearing is an exceptional amount of attention that from the entire commission that we are aware that parking is a problem in the city, and we want to make sure that there's progress made. And the comments that are being made about the proposal for the accessibility access go well beyond the four corners of accessibility access. In fact, most of them relate to the residential parking permit program, which is not before the commission, it's before the council. And there may be a little bit of jurisdictional envy going on that we'd like to help solve that problem. But what's our purview in tonight?
We were just discussing whether the RPP does come to the commission, and I think because the council wants the RPP program to be initiated as soon as possible, the policy level decision will be made at the city council directly. However, as additional, as neighborhoods decide to opt in, I imagine that the commission will hear the RPP issues at that stage. So you ultimately will have some purview over RPP in general. And as for the issue tonight, I think that you can refer the matter to the parking subcommittee. That's within your overall purview.
Well, actually, I'm sensitive to the suggestion that you might have a better practical result on the accessibility parking if it's considered within the context of the larger parking strategy. And if the larger parking strategy is being deliberated by the council and its committee, should we not just send this to them to be integrated into their discussion of the larger parking issues? Or should they send the larger issues to us so that we can do that job instead of them?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Michael. We were just talking again. I think it really works either way. I mean, the item before you tonight is the consideration of this specific policy. You can, pass it on with suggestions or not pass it on to the council. That's your purview as a body. Whether or not we can still introduce this as part of a larger RPP solution directly to the council, by all means, we can definitely do that as a recommendation I'm hearing from the council, or at least by strong interest of the body, of the commission. And but in this case, the council would have to agree to bring down the RPP policy discussion to the PTC, and I just haven't heard that. I haven't heard that yet.
Okay. So so before we get to a vote on the substitute motion, Vice Chair Keller has some comments to make.
So I have been torn on the two motions and trying to figure out which way to go on this. And it's kind of a hard thing to think about, particularly since being on the parking subcommittee, I like sinking my teeth into things, and I think I could improve this. But on the other hand, there's another consideration. And that is that we are a deliberative body that's a recommending body to the City Council. And to the extent that we deliberate for too long and take too long on things and kick them back and study and analyze and don't get it done, it actually discourages the council from giving us things to do. Now, I'm not sure why the council has decided to do the RPP itself rather than giving it to us to review it and recommend it and give them comments. It may have to do with the amount of things on our plate. It may have to do with how long it's taking us to get them the comp plan. It may have to do with their being jealous of a really hot potato issue that they want to address, and therefore don't want us interfering with their political hot potato process. I can't really analyze that. I can only guess. But the thing from my point of view is that I am going to vote against the substitute motion. And if the substitute motion fails, then I'm going to recommend a friendly amendment to the maker and seconder of this motion, of the original motion, that this be considered a pilot project that is reviewed after a certain number of years, and then after the success of a residential parking permit program, we see whether there's still a need for this disabled parking space policy, or whether it can be sunset. So that's what I would do as a substitute motion, and I think that we're well served by not pocketing the policy by handing it to the subcommittee, but by actually showing that we can analyze things, give feedback, and recommend things to the council. So that's my thought. And by the way, if we were to sort of pocket it by sending it to the subcommittee, that doesn't preclude the council from taking it on itself, ignoring our delay of the process.
Any question? Commissioner Alchek.
I just want to get a little more clarification here. Are you suggesting that the council decided that we wouldn't be a part of the solution process for the major parking crisis in our city because it's a perceived bottleneck? Because we'd slow it down?
I certainly was not suggesting that at all. I think that the council is very appreciative of this body's efforts, and there are a full range of solutions that are being taken up by this body, and you have a lot of work cut out for yourselves.
I just want to ask another sort of procedural question. Is there anything precluding us from creating a study session on parking permits and weighing in on this on our own?
No, absolutely not. And I do think that at a minimum, the staff will be updating you on the process through, the planning director reports, and in fact, as I understand it, the parking subcommittee has been active in attending some of the meetings and is representing the Planning and Transportation Commission in connection with the formation of the RPP and the outreach for the process already.
I don't. This is not the place, but I'd like to suggest we do that, because the perception that we take a long time is factually inaccurate. We're quick decision makers, and if we're not going to do it, someone should tell Nielsen and Ken that they're speaking to nobody every time they address this commission, because we're not involved in the RPP process, so they might as well just start skipping our meetings.
Chair Michael, may I address the commissioner for just a quick second? I do want to thank you all for the feedback and the input. Definitely this program can definitely be improved. And I just want to make the point. It kills me. It really kills me that I cannot help the community when they ask me for help. People have called me asking me to let me put in an extra parking space for them, and I just can't do it. And the policy that we provided in front of you, they asked me for a year and a half, and I just couldn't do it. And a lot of it focused around concerns about RPP. I really think these are just two completely separate issues. Even if you have an RPP program, a program like this can still really benefits someone that has an accessible need. And it is not a very difficult thing for us to do, but we just have to have a policy framework. We have to have a fee structure that allows us to accept funding to give someone a solution. When we finally agreed to give this person a demonstration project, we got it in within about 4 to 5 weeks. But it took us a year and a half internally to say, is this the right time? Is it time to go to the PTC? Is it time to go to the council? Because there was so much other concern about the larger picture. And this is such a small element. I just want you to recognize that when people have this type of a need, in this specific case, in this example, it was in a moment in time when this person became disabled and needed the help. And for a year, there was a struggle. A year and a half, there was a struggle to help these people. And I think I understand the concerns within the community, concerns about neighbors. I really think that is a much larger picture than what you're likely going to be seeing. We're the ones that will deal with the applicants. We might get one a year, we might get none a year, but when people call, at least we can help, and that's all that the policy is intended to do, is to provide us a framework for us to respond to the community. I have a brother that is in a wheelchair. A program like this would be extremely beneficial to him in the community in which he lives. And I see other people that have that need. I understand the concerns about RPP. I understand the greater picture issues. And I get a little emotional on this specific topic because I just want to help people. And we're pushing off one tool, that I really think the community can strongly benefit from. That's why we advanced it to you. So, it's a little bit of an emotional plea. I try to be factual when we present to the commission, but I really saw the discussion getting much larger on a topic that was outside of this specific topic.
So thank you very much. I think we're ready for a vote on the substitute motion, which would be to refer the proposed policy to a committee. All in favor of the substitute motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Nay. So it's 3 in favor, being Commissioners Alczek, Tanaka, and Pinelli, and 4 opposed, being Commissioners King, Michael, Keller, and Martinez. So the substitute motion fails. Then we have a vote on the... Not necessarily.
I would like to make an amendment.
So on the main motion, Vice Chair Keller has like to propose an amendment.
So I'd like to propose 2 amendments, if I may. The first amendment is that that this be considered a pilot project and we see its success for a period of time, unspecified period of time, and reviewed, and then based on that review, we can either consider canceling it or recommending it be adopted permanently.
When you first brought that up, I was thinking, now why should we do that? But I think it's all a pilot project that as we see the number of people that benefit or don't, the problems it creates in a community, I think it would be evident that we want to change it. So yes, I'm willing to accept it as a pilot project.
I see a nod from the seconder as well. The second amendment I'd like to suggest is that the recommendation is on the broad outlines of the program as proposed, and that we encourage staff to consider amending it in consideration of the comments made by the commission before submitting it to council. And I don't want to be specific on what staff might amend, but just give them the freedom to, the encouragement to amend it before going to council as necessary.
I will also accept that amendment, but I also know that the council reads our meeting notes, and I think the importance of this discussion will not go unnoticed by them. So yes.
That's acceptable to me as well.
Thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Tanaka?
I'd also like to make some amendments. First amendment is to prevent neighborhood conflict. I would like in places where this is requested that all the surrounding houses get notified, so they have the option to weigh in on the application.
Can you clarify what does it mean to weigh in?
So basically, I think it's similar. I guess the concept I have is similar to when someone wants to build a second story on their house. They basically notify the people in the neighborhood so that basically they know the impact's coming. It just doesn't. Someone doesn't come to a bucket of blue paint one day and say, "Oh, okay, can't park here anymore." Right? I think if you surprise people, you're going to have a lot of battles in your hand, and I think it'd be well served for everyone nearby to be notified.
Okay.
It's acceptable to me as well.
Okay. My second amendment is that I think all the parking programs we've been looking at have been cost neutral, and so I think this one should be as well. So I think my amendment is that this program be cost neutral.
No, I don't accept that amendment. I will go with the amounts that the staff report recommends.
Okay. And then the other amendment I have is that this, if it does go to council, that that some information about the number of placards that are in the city be told to city council. You know, the magnitude of the potential. I think that's going to be important. So we know it's not just 4, that's maybe perhaps more.
Are you done? Yeah, and I think it would be important for the PTC to also receive that information. So yes, I accept that.
Okay. So,
Chair?
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, I think those are all the amendments I have so far, but I would say this, that in general, I think that this program is still not very well thought out. I still think that should go to the Parking Subcommittee, so I'm still not going to support it, but that's my point so far.
Commissioner King.
I'd like to weigh in with my friendly amendment. Could we please add that, just to be very specific, because I think it's important to measure these things, and so mine would be to add, make sure the staff will maintain a wait list of applicants who are declined for the 500-foot exclusion.
Yes, I accept that.
I accept it also. Commissioner Alchek?
I'd like to suggest a friendly amendment that we recommend everything you've recommended be reviewed only after the RPP has been dealt with, so that we don't further slow down the City Council in their effort to solve that process. So that if this is passed and this goes to the City Council, that it be reviewed only after they've had an opportunity to begin or solve their RPP problem.
No, I don't accept that amendment.
I think we're ready for a vote on the motion. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. So the motion carries 4 votes in favor, 3 against. Voting in favor are Commissioners Martinez, Keller, Michael, and King. Voting against are Commissioners Alchek, Tanaka, and Pinelli. So at this point, we close the public hearing. Do we get a director's report?
Thank you, Chair Mark. I do have just one item that I wanted to read out to the Commission. That's in regards to Bike Palo Alto 2013. Bike Palo Alto is a resident-led initiative that helps promote the identification of bike-friendly routes within the community. This year's event is being held this Sunday at El Carmelo School from 1 to 4 o'clock, so I did want to invite all of you to participate in that event. This year, the event will highlight 3 routes within the community that serve Menlo Park, Mountain View, and the Baylands, and are actually going to highlight some of the recently installed bicycle facilities within the community, including our green bike lanes on Park Boulevard and our green bike sharrows that just went in on Copper Street today. So hope to see you all there on Sunday, and I'll hopefully be riding my bike next to one of you guys. Thank you very much.
I think we have some minutes to approve for September 11th and September 25th, which were distributed electronically. Vice Chair Keller?
I move that those minutes be accepted as amended.
Is there a second? The motion fails. There's no second.
Second.
Commissioner Alchek seconds. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No, but I abstain because I didn't read them. And I wasn't here.
Okay. 6 in favor, 1 abstaining, Commissioner Martinez abstaining. So we heard from Secretary Elner that our next meeting is October 30th, dealing with the California Avenue Concept Plan and the traffic model. Maybe there'll be some more parking issues to take up then. The commission representative of the City Council in October is Commissioner King. Have you learned anything so far?
Well, for those who weren't paying attention, so Monday night they chose to, regarding the SEIR and the fine for the Edgewood Plaza project, Council adopted our recommendation of the $94,200 fee to be levied, and the staff had altered their recommendation to defer for a period of 6 months the specific use for those funds. And I believe Council shortened that to 3 months in the final vote. So I'm sorry, Commissioner Alcheck, did you have a question of me?
Okay. And then just to confirm, the commission representative at City Council in November will be Commissioner Pinelli. Okay. Commissioner Alcheck.
So I just want to share with the commission also that in Crescent Park they have fully implemented an overnight parking program. Sounds like a residential parking permit program, but it's different because it addresses a specific need. Effectively, nobody can park on the street in Crescent Park overnight without purchasing a $100 parking permit per vehicle, up to 2 vehicles, and they have to demonstrate that they're either tenants or owners of the home that they intend to park in front of. So that actually went into effect. Permits have been purchased. I don't know how many, but it's an interesting development in terms of parking solutions. I just wanted to share that with you guys in case you didn't really know how that worked.
Okay. Then we have liaison subcommittees and committee representatives. Just to let everybody know, I know that Commissioners Tanaka and Martinez had been unable to attend our last couple of meetings. So we're going to update the list that's on the sheet. So the Regional Housing Mandate Committee, I'll continue to represent the PTC on that committee for the time being. ARB liaison will continue to be Commissioner Martinez. Next year's report to the council on the commission results and priorities will be done by me as chair. On the comp plan, we've had subcommittees in the individual elements for housing, transportation, natural resources, business and economics, and governance. And we're now in the final stages, as we learned earlier this evening. So we're going to roll all of the comp plan subcommittees into one subcommittee, which is going to be chaired by Commissioner Martinez. I will also assist on that, and there's room for a third person if there's a comp plan enthusiast. Vice Chair Keller will be the third person on this committee. The other committee that we have is CIP and Infrastructure, which is composed of Vice Chair Keller and Commissioner Pinelli, and you will be lying in wait for the CIP program to kick in after the start of the year. I noticed that the Council Infrastructure Committee is in full swing, and I've found myself able to attend the last few meetings, which have been very, very instructive and very pertinent to some of the concerns that are within the PTC responsibilities. So I believe I spoke to Commissioner Pinelli when I ran into the other day as to what happened at the last meeting. Jaime, were you were there at that meeting? Perhaps it would be useful to update the commission on what's going on with the the Council Infrastructure Committee. I know that they're looking at the possibility of different funding alternatives for parking solutions. They looked at the feasibility of a Melrose district downtown, which seems to be fairly complex and maybe difficult or not feasible. They've authorized a consultant to do some more community outreach and additional polling regarding community support for different projects, including parking facilities that might be financed with a general obligation bond that would require supermajority vote of the residents, or other increase to the hotel tax, the transient occupancy tax, or maybe even a business license tax or a sales tax increase. But that outreach and polling is going to be done on a fairly urgent basis, or high priority will probably be done in November and report back to the council in December, and at which point they will have some more data with which to consider the alternatives.
Thank you, Chair Michael. I think you hit all the points. Everything you said is correct. One of the initiatives that we referenced earlier in the previous item regarding the development of an RFP for trying to find opportunities to build parking structures through public-private opportunities was a direct result of the work by that subcommittee as well. And so we will be going back to the council in November with an RFP based off of their direction.
Okay. So this is obviously important. We should follow the developments, and where it's appropriate, we can support that work. Our last subcommittee is the parking subcommittee, staffed by Commissioners Pinelli and Vice Chair Keller, and it looks to me like we have a vacancy for a third member of that committee if there's a passion to be involved in solutions here. Is anybody? I'm seeing Commissioner Alchek would like to join the parking subcommittee. So I would like to task this group of coming back to the full commission with the proposed sort of charter of what you will be doing. There was an initial draft, which is one of colleagues' memo, which seems to me to be moot because it directly related to focusing on downtown parking solutions, which the council's working on. So that's not your charter. So figure out what the charter is, because it's a significant possible contribution that we at the Commission can make, and through our subcommittee process, we can roll up our sleeves and do some serious work with staff, hopefully not to add any burden, but to be of assistance. But please take that up, and we'll agendize a discussion of what the mission of that subcommittee will be. Vice Chair Keller.
I believe there was a special council meeting on Thursday a couple of weeks ago, but it was in October. You might not have known about it. But I believe that was to deal with the dispute in TDM. And I believe that there was a policy that was moved forward on that. Maybe Chief Translation Official Jaime Rodriguez can talk about that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, a couple Thursdays ago, the council asked us to begin the development, or at least the analysis of what a TDM, or Transportation Demand Management program, could look like, either as a district-specific type program within the downtown core or the California Avenue business districts, or as part of a citywide TDM type of an approach. And the council authorized us to allocate staff time and resources of up to $100,000 to do research, to try and develop recommendations that we would report back to the council in within, if I'm right, I thought it was 3 months. I think it was 3 months. And so we're going to start that initiative sometime in November.
Okay. Well, I think that's all that I have. Vice Chair Keller.
I believe that the business and economics element and the governance elements are still drafting. So are those being done by the original committees listed on the agenda, or are those being taken up by the new committee?
Oh, I can give you a report on that. The business and economics element met today, and Commissioner Martinez and Tanaka participated along with the planning staff. It was the maybe what we looked at was an updated draft that we'd seen on several prior occasions, and we'd given comments. The comments were reconciled, and we came to the conclusion that we were ready to wrap up our work as a subcommittee. The draft is going to be cleaned up. It's going to come back to me sort of individually for some proofreading, which I'm happy to do, and then it's. The plan is to take it to the committee of the Chamber of Commerce at their meeting in early November, and then also to the representatives of Stanford University, at which point it will be in process to put before the council. The work on the governance committee had. I guess it'll come back to the commission and then the council. But at the subcommittee, we're basically done. On the governance element, we had been on hold, and that will now proceed. There's some input that's needed from the staff. I think the city manager's office in particular could be helpful, and that committee is. Commissioner Martinez, Alcheck, and myself.
Since the business and economics element draft is done, is it possible for other members of the commission to review that draft, or does it have to go back to, what's the process of doing that? Is that allowed or not allowed?
Here.
Before you do that, I think we are in danger of violating the Brown Act by having more than 3 of us working on something that's not made available in a public hearing. I'm not sure about that. The city attorney, you want to kind of refute that?
I apologize. I didn't follow that. What was the question?
The question I asked was whether the draft of the subcommittee's work can be given to other members of the commission before it goes through all this other review, and with comments going back to staff, not going back to the members of the committee.
I think the best practice is to have the subcommittee review it, provide it to staff, and then we'll agendize it for further discussion. And then if individual members have proofreading types of comments that you want to provide us before the hearing, so that the public hearing doesn't need to be taken up with those types of stylistic comments, staff can entertain them at that time.
Well, what I'm actually suggesting is something slightly different, which is that if it basically be agendized as an informational item so that we can all look at it before it goes to various other groups like the Chamber of Commerce and downtown businesses or other businesses, if the rest of us can look at it. I'm wondering about that. I don't really want to have a special meeting on that. I just want to figure out a way of getting it so that people can look at it. Because otherwise, it's hard. I don't want to iterate on it further going down the road too many times.
That would be fine. We can do that.
But as a subcommittee and chair, I think we've, with staff, agreed to a process for wrapping up the business element. And I'd like to stick with that rather than having it circulated for additional comments at this time. The commissioners will receive it, but we felt it needed this additional input. And I'd like to stick to the process that we've already adopted rather than kind of going rogue with it at this time.
So as chair and cognizant of our Brown Act compliance obligations, and also I think Vice Chair Keller's insightful comment about the accessibility parking proposal and whether or not our process of review is actually slowing things down versus being a productive and efficient process. I'm going to suggest that we're going to have a clean draft with comments from these two outreach groups in very short order, and at which point it'll be available for the commission on the agenda, and that will be ample opportunity to respond appropriately. Vice Chair Keller.
I think that's fine. My only concern about this is that, unlike some of the other elements, there was never a meeting of the entire commission to review it prior to going to the subcommittee. So we've had different processes going on. For some of them, we've reviewed them before this went to the subcommittees, and then some of them we haven't. So
we will try to fix that with the governance element. Anything else for this evening's meeting? So meeting is adjourned at